The moment Maris Bennett's name was called to the stage, the crystal champagne flutes in a dozen manicured hands froze midair. Across the gilded ballroom, men in $1,000 tuxedos felt their certainty crack like thin ice beneath expensive shoes. The woman they'd dismissed as the assistant, the one they'd mocked for daring to attend, stood in the spotlight as the evening's most significant philanthropist.
And Adrian Vale, the tech billionaire who'd invited her, finally understood he'd been blind to power hiding in plain sight. But this revelation came at a cost neither of them anticipated. If you want to see how a single evening can shatter every assumption about worth and belonging, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Adrian Vale learned early that silence could be wielded like a weapon. At 37, he'd mastered the art of the measured pause, the calculated glance, the strategic withdrawal of attention that made investors sweat and competitors stumble. He'd built Valecore Technologies from a borrowed garage and ruthless ambition into a company worth $8 billion. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like The Algorithm Whisperer and From Broke to Billionaire, the Adrian Vale story. But tonight, standing in his penthouse office 60 floors above the city, he felt the weight of a different kind of silence, the hollow echo of a life built on transactions rather than connections. The skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, each light representing someone going home to dinner conversations and inside jokes, to people who remembered their birthday without calendar notifications. Adrian pressed his palm against the cold glass and wondered when success had stopped feeling like victory. The Grayson proposal is ready for your signature. He turned to find Maris Bennett standing in the doorway, tablet in hand, her expression professionally neutral. She'd worked as his executive assistant for 3 years, longer than anyone else had lasted. Where others eventually revealed themselves as social climbers, using the position as a networking opportunity, Maris simply did her job with quiet precision. "It's past 8, Adrian said. "You should have gone home hours ago." "So should you." She crossed to his desk, heels clicking softly on marble. "But we both know you won't sign anything without reading every page, and the Grayson people need an answer by midnight." Adrian accepted the tablet, fingers brushing hers briefly. "You don't have to stay." "I'm aware." Maris settled into the chair across from his desk, producing her own tablet. "I have other work to catch up on anyway." This was their routine, had been for months. The office would empty, the city would darken, and they'd work in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional questions or observation. Maris never treated him like a celebrity or a meal ticket. She argued when she disagreed. She corrected his mistakes. She treated him like a person. It was, Adrian realized with uncomfortable clarity, the closest thing he had to friendship. "The Harrington Gala is in 2 weeks," he said, scanning the proposal without really seeing it. "I need a +1. Maris didn't look up from her screen. "I'll contact the agency. They have several appropriate options." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Adrian set down the tablet. "I don't want an escort. I want..." He paused, suddenly aware of how the request would sound. "Would you consider going with me? As my guest, not as staff?" Now Maris looked up. Her dark eyes studied him with an intensity that made Adrian feel transparent. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of shallow conversations with people angling for something. Because every event feels like performance theater. Because..." He exhaled. "Because you're the only person I can actually talk to." Maris leaned back, fingers drumming against her tablet, a rare tell that she was genuinely considering something. "You understand what that would look like? Your social circle isn't exactly known for progressive thinking."
And an assistant at the Harrington Gala would be, "I don't care what it looks like." "You should." Her tone remained even, but something flickered in her expression. "It would reflect on you. People would question your judgment, and they would absolutely eviscerate me." "Let them try." Adrian stood, crossing to the window. "I built a company everyone said was impossible. I've survived hostile takeovers, public scandals, a congressional investigation. I think I can handle some gossip from people whose greatest accomplishment is inheriting money." "This isn't about business, Adrian." Maris's voice carried a note of something he rarely heard from her, caution. "This is about your social standing in circles that matter for reasons beyond profit margins. Board seats, investment partnerships,
political influence. The Harrington Gala isn't just a party, it's where power reinforces itself. Then maybe it's time that power was challenged. Maris was quiet for a long minute. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You're serious about this? I am. And you've considered how it will affect me? Being dragged into scrutiny I've carefully avoided for 3 years? Adrian turned to face her. I won't force you. If you say no, we'll never mention it again and nothing changes. But if you say yes, he paused, choosing his words carefully. If you say yes, you'll attend as my equal, not my assistant, not my accessory, my guest. Maris stood, smoothing her skirt, a gesture he recognized as her buying time to think. She crossed to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. I've spent my entire career making myself invisible, she said quietly. Competent but unobtrusive, capable but non-threatening. I learned early that being a woman in corporate spaces means choosing between being respected or being liked, and neither path guarantees advancement. So I chose a third option, being indispensable. The person who knows where everything is, who remembers every detail, who makes the impossible happen so smoothly that people forget it was ever impossible. I've noticed. Have you? Maris glanced at him. Because most people don't. Most people see the title executive assistant and mentally file me under furniture. They talk freely around me because they've forgotten I'm human. They dismiss my intelligence because my job is to make their lives easier. And I've let them, because invisibility is its own kind of power. Adrian felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. And I'm asking you to give that up. You're asking me to step into a spotlight I've been avoiding. Maris turned fully toward him. The Harrington Gala will have 300 of the wealthiest, most connected people in the country. If I attend as your guest, every single one of them will dissect me. My background, my education, my wardrobe, my lineage. They'll look for reasons to dismiss me, and they'll find them because they need me to be dismissible. It validates their worldview. And if you don't care about their validation, then I'd be lying. A ghost of a smile touched Maris's lips. I'm human, Adrian. Rejection stings even when it comes from people whose approval I don't want, but... She paused. But I've never built my life around other people's comfort, and I'm curious what would happen if I stopped hiding. Adrian felt his pulse quivering. Is that a yes? It's a maybe. Maris's smile widened slightly. Let me sleep on it. This isn't a decision to make at 8:30 on a Tuesday night while we're both exhausted. Fair enough. She moved toward the door and paused. Adrian? Why does this matter so much to you? He considered deflecting, offering some strategic explanation about challenging social norms or making a statement. But Maris had always demanded honesty, so he gave it to her. Because I'm tired of being alone in crowds, he said. And you're the only person who makes me feel less alone. Maris held his gaze for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Walls carefully maintained for professional distance, showing the first hairline crack. I'll give you an answer tomorrow, she said softly, and left him alone with the glittering city and the weight of hope he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Adrian arrived at the office to find Maris already at her desk, looking as composed as ever in a charcoal suit that probably cost a tenth of what his secretary across town spent on designer labels. Good morning, she said, handing him his coffee, black, no sugar, exactly as he liked it. You have a 9 o'clock with the legal team, lunch with Senator Michaels, and the board meeting at 3. Maris, and yes, she continued, meeting his eyes, I'll attend the gala with you, as your guest. Adrian felt something loosen in his chest. You're sure? I'm sure. I'm curious what happens when I stop playing it safe. Maris returned to her computer. Though I reserve the right to say, I told you so when your friends treat me like I wandered in from the catering staff. They're not my friends. No? Maris arched an eyebrow. Then what are they? Adrian considered the question. The people in his social circle, the Vandermeers with their old money snobbery, the Cartwrights who collected philanthropic board seats like trading cards, Richard Ashford, who'd inherited 3 companies and run 2 into the ground, Vivian Lassiter, whose idea of hardship was waiting for a table at restaurants with 3-month waiting lists. Occupational hazards, he said finally. People I'm expected to know. Well then, Maris's smile carried a hint of steel. Let's see how they handle the unexpected. News of Adrian's invitation spread through his social circle with the speed of malicious gossip, which is to say, immediately. The first call came from Richard Ashford 2 days later. Adrian was in a meeting when Maris buzzed through. "Richard Ashford on line 2, she said, her tone carefully neutral. "He says it's urgent." Adrian excused himself from the conference room. "Richard, what's the crisis? Is it true?" Richard's voice carried that particular blend of condescension and glee that meant he was about to enjoy himself at someone else's expense. "You're bringing your assistant to the Harrington Gala?" "I'm bringing Maris Bennett, yes." "Adrian, buddy, I'm trying to help you here." Richard's tone shifted to false concern. "You can't show up to the social event of the season with your secretary. It's professional suicide. What will people think? That I chose interesting company over predictable company. They'll think you couldn't get a real date." Richard laughed. "Come on, man. If you're between relationships, there are services for this. Beautiful, educated women who know how to handle high-profile events. I can make some calls." Adrian felt his jaw tighten. "Maris is beautiful and educated. She's staff, Adrian. There's a hierarchy. You're a billionaire tech CEO. She's... What, does she even have a college degree?" "My T. Double major in business and computer science. Graduated summa cum laude." Silence on the other end. Then, "Well, that's... Look, credentials don't matter. It's about optic, perception. You bring an assistant to the Harrington Gala, and people will assume you're either making a statement or having some kind of breakdown. Let them assume whatever they want. I'm trying to save you from embarrassment." Richard's voice hardened. "And her, frankly. Do you have any idea what the women at that gala will do to her? Vivian alone will tear her apart. They'll smile and ask pointed questions and make sure she knows exactly where she ranks. It'll be brutal. Then maybe they should reconsider their behavior." "Oh, this is adorable." Richard's laugh turned sharp. "You think you can change centuries of social order because you have money? These people don't care how many billions you're worth, Adrian. They care about lineage, legacy, who your parents were and where you summered. You're already an outsider who got lucky. Bringing the help to their event just proves you don't understand the rules." "I understand the rules perfectly," Adrian said coldly. "I just don't respect them." "Then you're going to learn a very expensive lesson." Richard paused. "But hey, it's your funeral. I'll have a front row seat when they humiliate her. Should be entertaining." The line went dead. Adrian sat in silence, Richard's words echoing in his mind. The ugly certainty in his voice, the assumption that cruelty was inevitable, even justified. He'd known his social circle was superficial. He hadn't fully grasped how vicious they could be. Over the following week, the calls multiplied. Vivian Lassiter left a voicemail dripping with false sweetness. "Darling, I heard the most amusing rumor. You're not actually bringing your assistant to the gala, are you? Tell me it's not true. Those poor people work so hard. Wouldn't it be cruel to throw her into a situation where she'd be so obviously out of place?" Marcus Vandermeer sent a text. "Dude, what are you thinking? Bring someone appropriate or come alone. Don't make this weird." Caroline Hartwick, who sat on 3 boards with Adrian, called personally. "Adrian, I'm speaking to you as a friend. This is a mistake. The Harrington Gala has standards. Bringing your assistant crosses lines that exist for good reasons. It undermines the entire social structure we've built. People will think you're mocking them." "Maybe I am," Adrian replied. "Then you'll find yourself uninvited from a lot of future events." Caroline's voice turned cold. "Is she really worth professional isolation?" Adrian thought of Maris, her quiet competence, her sharp wit, the way she treated him like a human being instead of a bank account with a pulse. "Yes," he said simply. "She is." Maris handled the gossip with the same calm efficiency she applied to everything else. When Adrian asked if she'd heard the rumors, she simply nodded. Richard Ashford's assistant called fishing for details. Vivian Lassiter's personal shopper contacted me about finding something appropriate for the event. Very subtle. "Are you reconsidering?" "No." Maris looked up from her computer. "Though I am curious what they think appropriate means. I'm guessing nothing that might outshine the women who spent $50,000 on a gown." "You could spend $50,000 on a gown if you wanted." "I could," Maris smiled. "But I won't. I'm not trying to compete with them, Adrian. I'm not trying to prove I belong in their world. I'm simply attending an event as your guest, wearing something elegant that reflects who I am, not who they think I should be. And who are you? Maris considered the question. Someone who's tired of making myself smaller to fit other people's expectations. Someone who's curious what happens when I stop. Adrian felt that uncomfortable twist in his chest again, the one that showed up whenever Maris revealed glimpses of the person beneath the professional facade. They're going to try to hurt you. I know. Maris's expression remained serene. But pain is only effective when you care about the source. I don't need Vivian Lassiter's approval. I don't need Richard Ashford to think I'm worthy. I know my value. The question is, do you? Yes, Adrian said without hesitation. Then that's all that matters. Maris returned to her work, effectively ending the conversation. But Adrian couldn't shake the weight of what was coming. He'd navigated hostile business environments, faced down corporate sharks, survived media crucifixions. This felt different, more personal, more dangerous, because he'd invited Maris into a situation where the weapons were social rather than legal, and he had no way to protect her from the cruelty he knew was waiting. The night before the gala, Adrian found himself unable to focus on work. He paced his penthouse, looking out at the city and questioning every decision that had led to this moment. His phone buzzed. Maris, still having second thoughts? Adrian smiled despite his anxiety. How did you know? Because you've been uncharacteristically quiet all day. And you sent me 3 separate emails clarifying details that didn't need clarification. I don't want you to get hurt. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I'm stronger than you think. I know you are. That's not the point. Then what is? Adrian stared at the message, trying to articulate the complicated tangle of emotions he'd been avoiding. Finally, he typed, "You matter to me. More than I realized until I started imagining what they might say to you." The response took longer this time. When it came, it was simpler than he expected. Then stand beside me tomorrow night and let me handle them. I've been fighting my whole life, Adrian. I know how to survive. This isn't about survival. You shouldn't have to fight at all. No, but I do. And I'm choosing to fight for the right to exist in spaces I've been told I don't belong. That choice matters more than their opinions. Adrian read the message 3 times, feeling something shift in his understanding. He'd been thinking of this as protecting Maris, but maybe that was patronizing. Maybe she didn't need protection. Maybe she needed him to trust that she could handle herself and simply be present while she did. I'll be there, he typed, right beside you. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Adrian laughed softly, tension easing slightly. That's one word for it. I prefer transformative. But we'll see. He set down his phone and returned to the window. The city glittered below, indifferent to human drama. Somewhere out there, Maris was preparing for battle in her own way, with calm determination and unwavering self-knowledge. And tomorrow night, Adrian thought, the social circle that had always treated him like a curiosity would learn what it meant to underestimate someone who had nothing left to prove. The day of the Harrington Gala arrived with perfect weather, the kind of crisp autumn evening that made the city feel almost romantic. Adrian dressed carefully, adjusting his bow tie 3 times before accepting it was as good as it would get. His phone remained mercifully quiet. The gossip had apparently exhausted itself, or more likely, people were saving their comments for the event itself. At 6:30, his driver pulled up to Maris's apartment building in a neighborhood that definitely didn't scream, "Billionaire's inner circle." Adrian waited in the car, palms sweating in a way they never did before board meetings or investor presentations. Then the building door opened, and Maris stepped out. She wore a gown the color of deep emeralds, sleek and elegant without trying too hard. Her hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck. Minimal jewelry, just simple diamond studs that caught the streetlight. She looked exactly like herself, just polished to a gleam that would have made lesser women seem overdone, but somehow made Maris look effortlessly sophisticated. Adrian got out of the car to meet her. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the dress or the hair. It was the confidence in her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the visible decision to step into the light instead of hiding in shadows. "You look terrified," Maris replied with a slight smile. "I'm not terrified, Adrian paused. "Okay, I'm a little terrified. Of them or for me?" "Both." Maris took his arm. Then let's go remind them that power comes in forms they don't recognize. They settled into the car, and Adrian found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The subtle scent of her perfume, the quiet confidence radiating from her stillness. "Thank you," he said as they merged into traffic, "for agreeing to this." "Thank me later," Maris replied, "after we see if I survive the night." "You'll survive." "I know." She looked at him, eyes gleaming with something that might have been anticipation. "The question is whether they will." Adrian laughed, a real laugh that loosened the knot in his chest. Whatever happened tonight, at least he wouldn't face it alone. The car pulled up to the Harrington estate just as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The mansion glowed with warm light, music drifting through open doors. Valets rushed to attend arriving guests, a parade of luxury vehicles disgorging women in designer gowns and men in custom tuxedos. Adrian stepped out first, then offered his hand to Maris. She took it, rising from the car with fluid grace. And together, they walked toward the lion's den. The marble entrance hall of the Harrington estate stretched before them like a cathedral built to worship wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across floors so polished they reflected like mirrors. Servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Adrian felt Maris's hand tighten briefly on his arm, the only sign that she registered the opulence designed to intimidate. Then her grip relaxed, and she moved forward with the same calm authority she brought to his office every morning. They'd barely crossed the threshold when Vivian Lassiter materialized, her Dior gown shimmering like liquid gold. She air-kissed Adrian's cheek, leaving lipstick marks he'd have to wipe away later, then turned her attention to Maris with the focused intensity of a predator spotting prey. "Well," Vivian said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood, "this must be the famous assistant everyone's been talking about." Maris Bennett. Maris extended her hand with professional courtesy. "It's nice to meet you, Ms. Lassiter. I've read about your philanthropic work. The children's literacy program you launched last year seems particularly effective." Vivian's smile faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected competent conversation. "How informed of you. And what a lovely dress. Vintage?" "Contemporary," Maris replied smoothly. "I prefer classic lines to trendy statements. They age better." The implication hung in the air that Vivian's aggressively modern gown might look dated in 6 months. Adrian bit back a smile as Vivian's eyes narrowed. "How refreshing," Vivian said, her tone suggesting anything but. "Adrian, darling, you must introduce your guests to the Vandermeers. They're holding court by the terrace. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to meet someone from such a different background." She drifted away, trailing expensive perfume and malice. "Round one," Maris murmured, still breathing. "She implied you bought your dress at a thrift store." "I caught that." Maris accepted a champagne flute from the passing server. "I also implied her fashion choices lack longevity." "We're even." Adrian studied her carefully. "You're enjoying this." "I'm observing." Maris took a small sip. "There's a difference. They operate on assumption that I'll be intimidated, that I'll try too hard to impress them, that I'll reveal myself as inferior. Every moment I don't give them what they expect destabilizes their worldview. It's fascinating to watch." Before Adrian could respond, Marcus Vandermeer appeared with his wife Claudia, both dressed in clothes that screamed old money trying to look effortlessly wealthy. "Adrian!" Marcus clapped him on the shoulder with false heartiness. "We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind about coming." "Just fashionably late." Adrian kept his tone light. "Marcus, Claudia, this is Maris Bennett." "Charmed," Claudia said, her eyes raking over Maris with the thoroughness of an appraiser evaluating questionable merchandise. "Bennett, that's English, isn't it? Are you from the Massachusetts Bennetts or the Philadelphia line?" "Neither," Maris replied. "My family's from the Midwest. No notable lineage unless you count my great-grandfather who invented a particularly efficient farming implement. The silence that followed was exquisite." Claudia's smile froze in place, unsure whether Maris was joking or genuinely claiming farming equipment as her heritage. "How industrial," Marcus said finally. "And you work for Adrian, is that right?" "I do."
It must be fascinating getting an inside look at how real business operates. Marcus's condescension was barely veiled, so different from the corporate structures most of us deal with. Adrian was very hands-on, I understand, very self-made.
The emphasis on self-made carried the weight of insult, a reminder that Adrian hadn't inherited his position. He is, Maris agreed. It's remarkable what people accomplish when they rely on intelligence and innovation rather than inherited capital and stagnant business models. Adrian coughed to cover a laugh. Claudia's expression went glacial. Well, she said, ice crystallizing in her voice, we should circulate. So many important people to greet. I'm sure you understand, Adrian. Some conversations require a certain level of relevance. They drifted away, and Adrian noticed heads turning throughout the room. People had definitely noticed Maris's arrival, and the whispers were spreading like fire through dry brush. You just called their entire existence stagnant, Adrian said quietly. I called their business models stagnant, Maris corrected. But if they want to take it personally, that's their choice.
They're going to come after you harder now. Good. Maris's eyes gleamed. I'd rather they attack directly than pretend it's civility while plotting behind my back. At least then we know where everyone stands. Adrian was beginning to understand something he'd missed before. Maris wasn't intimidated by these people. She was studying them like a scientist examining specimens, curious about their behavior but fundamentally unmoved by their judgment. The realization was both reassuring and unsettling, because if Maris didn't need his protection, what exactly was his role here? They moved deeper into the gala, navigating conversations that ranged from banal to openly hostile. Richard Ashford cornered them near the bar, bourbon in hand and malice in his eyes. Adrian and the infamous Maris Bennett. Richard's smile was wolfish. Tell me, how does it feel to be the most talked about person at the Harrington Gala? I imagine much like being discussed by strangers always feels, Maris replied. Mildly tedious. Richard laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Confident. I like that. Though confidence only carries you so far in rooms like this. Eventually, substance matters. Connection, background. The things that separate people who belong from people who are just visiting. Is that what you tell yourself? Maris met his gaze steadily. That your presence here is justified by bloodline rather than anything you've actually accomplished. Richard's smile vanished. Careful, sweetheart. You're out of your depth. Am I? Maris set down her champagne with deliberate care. Because from where I stand, I'm having conversations with people who mistake inheritance for achievement, who confuse exclusivity with excellence, and who are so terrified of irrelevance that they cling to arbitrary social hierarchies to avoid confronting their own mediocrity. The small group that had gathered to watch the confrontation went silent. Someone gasped softly. Richard's face flushed red. You have no idea who you're talking to. I know exactly who I'm talking to, Maris said calmly. A man who spent his entire life being told he matters because of his last name, who's never had to prove his worth because it was assigned at birth. A man who looks at someone like me and sees a threat to the only thing that makes him feel superior, the accident of his birth. Adrian. Richard's voice shook with barely controlled rage. Control your date before she embarrasses herself further. She's not my date, Adrian said quietly. She's my guest. And she doesn't need controlling, she needs listening to. You should try it. Richard drained his bourbon and stalked away. The onlookers dispersed quickly, unwilling to be associated with the confrontation. Adrian turned to Maris. That was necessary, Maris finished. He was going to escalate no matter what I said. Better to meet it head-on than let him control the narrative. You just made an enemy of one of the most vindictive men in this room. I made an enemy of someone who was already my enemy. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Maris smoothed her dress. Adrian, these people were never going to accept me. The question was whether I'd let their rejection define the evening or whether I'd define it myself. I chose the latter. Before Adrian could respond, a voice cut through the ambient conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Catherine Harrington stood at the top of the grand staircase, elegant in silver silk, commanding the room with the ease of someone born to authority. The crowd quieted immediately. Thank you all for attending tonight's gala, Catherine continued.
As many of you know, this evening celebrates not just social connection, but meaningful philanthropy. Our featured initiative this year addresses a crisis affecting millions: the lack of accessible, quality healthcare for children in underserved communities. Adrian felt Maris stiffen slightly beside her. Her expression remained neutral, but something had shifted in her posture. Thanks to the extraordinary generosity of our donors, Catherine said, we've raised over $12 million for the Harrington Foundation's Children's Health Initiative. But tonight, I want to recognize a contribution that goes beyond financial support. One donor didn't just write a check, they designed the entire program from the ground up. The room murmured with interest. People loved a mystery, especially when it came with prestige attached. This individual worked for 18 months to create a sustainable model that combines mobile health clinics, telemedicine infrastructure, and community education programs. They personally vetted every vendor, every partner organization, every piece of medical equipment. They built something that will serve over 50,000 children in its first year alone. Adrian's mind raced. He glanced at Maris, whose face had gone carefully blank, the expression she wore when hiding something significant. Our mystery philanthropist has chosen to remain anonymous until tonight, Catherine continued, but they've agreed to let me reveal their identity, because the work matters more than the privacy. Ladies and gentlemen, the architect and primary funder of the Harrington Foundation's Children's Health Initiative is Maris Bennett. The room exploded in stunned silence, then shocked murmurs. Adrian stared at Maris, who stood absolutely still, her expression unreadable. "Miss Bennett," Catherine called out, spotting her in the crowd. "Would you join me, please?" Maris didn't move immediately. Adrian saw her take a slow breath, saw the moment she made the decision to step forward. Then she was walking through the crowd, heads turning to follow her progress. People parted to let her pass, their expressions ranging from disbelief to embarrassment to dawning horror, especially the ones who'd been openly cruel to her earlier. Maris climbed the stairs with the same calm grace she brought to everything, meeting Catherine's warm smile with a slight nod. "Thank you for your discretion these past months," Catherine said, clasping Maris's hands. "And thank you for trusting us with your vision." "The work speaks for itself," Maris replied, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "The children who benefit won't care who funded it. They'll just care that someone did. Would you say a few words about the program?" Catherine stepped back, ceding the spotlight. Maris turned to face the assembled crowd. 300 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the country, most of whom had spent the last hour treating her like an interloper. 18 months ago, Maris began, her voice steady and clear, I received news that a child I'd been mentoring through a community program died from complications of diabetes. Not because the condition was untreatable, but because her family couldn't afford consistent medical care. She was 9 years old. The room remained absolutely silent. I realized that night that I could keep being angry about systemic failures, or I could try to fix one small part of the system. So I started researching. I talked to doctors, healthcare administrators, community organizers, families who'd lost children to preventable conditions, and I learned that the problem isn't just money, it's access, education, and sustainable infrastructure. Maris's gaze swept across the crowd, landing briefly on Richard, on Vivian, on the Vandermeers. The Harrington Foundation's Children's Health Initiative combines mobile clinics that bring medical care directly to underserved neighborhoods, telemedicine capabilities that connect families with specialists they'd never otherwise access, and education programs that teach parents to recognize warning signs early. It's designed to be replicable. Other cities, other foundations can adapt the model. Because this isn't about me. It's about changing a system that lets children die because their parents can't afford insurance. She paused, and Adrian saw something flash in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but a fierce determination that made her seem suddenly untouchable. I funded this initiative with money I earned through careful investments and a significant inheritance from my grandmother, who spent her life as a pediatric nurse in rural communities. She believed healthcare was a right, not a privilege. This program is her legacy as much as mine. Catherine began to clap, and the room joined in, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. But Adrian noticed the quality of the applause. Some people clapped genuinely, moved by Maris's words. Others clapped mechanically, their faces tight with embarrassment or resentment. Vivian's hands barely moved, her smile frozen in place. Richard didn't clap at all. He stared at Maris with undisguised hostility. The Vandermeers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recalculating everything they'd assumed about the woman they'd dismissed. Maris descended the stairs, and the crowd that had parted to let her through now pressed closer, people suddenly eager to speak with her. But she moved purposefully back toward Adrian, ignoring the reaching hands and calling voices. When she reached him, Adrian saw the tension in her shoulder, the slight tremor in her hands that she quickly controlled. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Ask me in an hour," Maris replied, "when I'm not fighting the urge to either cry or scream." "You were incredible up there." "I was necessary up there. There's a difference." She accepted another champagne flute from the passing server. They would have dismissed everything I said earlier as bitterness from an outsider. But money talks, Adrian. $12 million of my own money, spent on something that actually matters, speaks louder than any argument I could make about my worth. You shouldn't have to prove your worth with money. No, Maris agreed, but that's the language they understand, so I spoke it. Caroline Hartwick approached, her expression carefully neutral. Maris, that was quite a revelation. Was it? Maris met her eyes calmly. I've been doing this work for over a year. The only thing that changed tonight was your awareness of it. Caroline flinched slightly. I may have misjudged the situation earlier. When I called Adrian about his choice of guest, you assumed I was inappropriate for this event because of my job title, Maris finished. You operated on the assumption that executive assistants lack the education, resources, or vision to participate meaningfully in philanthropic work. You were wrong. But the question isn't whether you misjudged me. It's whether you'll examine why you made those assumptions in the first place. Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, then simply nodded and walked away. People continued to approach, some offering genuine congratulations, others transparently trying to salvage relationships they'd damaged earlier. Maris handled each interaction with professional courtesy, but Adrian noticed how she subtly positioned herself slightly behind him, using his presence as a buffer against the overwhelming attention. You want to get some air? He asked quietly. Maris nodded gratefully. They made their way through the crowd to the terrace, stepping into cool night air that felt like relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. The terrace overlooked formal gardens lit by subtle landscape lighting. A few other couples stood at the far end, but this corner was mercifully empty. Maris gripped the stone railing, her knuckles white. That was harder than I expected. You seemed completely composed. Years of practice. She looked out at the gardens. Do you know what it's like to work in corporate spaces as a woman? To know that every interaction is being judged not just on competence, but on likability? That being too assertive makes you a bitch, but being too accommodating makes you weak? That your appearance matters more than your credentials, but caring about appearance makes you vain? Adrian moved to stand beside her. I can't imagine. I learned to make myself small, Maris continued. To be competent without being threatening. To know everything without appearing to know more than the men in the room. To smile and deflect and never ever show that I was smarter, more capable, or more ambitious than my title suggested. Because that's how you survive. And tonight you stopped surviving and started fighting. Tonight I got tired of being small. Maris turned to face him. Do you know why I really agreed to come with you? You said you were curious. I was. But more than that, I was angry. Angry at a world that looks at someone like you, self-made, brilliant, successful, and still treats you like an outsider because you didn't inherit your position. Angry at people like Richard who've accomplished nothing but act superior because of bloodlines they had no control over. Angry at myself for playing along, for accepting that my value was determined by people who'd never bothered to see me as human. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. So I came tonight to prove something. Not to them, they're never going to truly accept either of us, but to myself. That I could stand in their spotlight and not shrink. That I could face their judgment and survive it. That I could be exactly who I am without apology. Adrian felt something shift in his chest, understanding clicking into place like a lock turning. This was never about me protecting you. No, Maris agreed. Though I appreciate the impulse, this was about me choosing to be visible, choosing to claim space. I've been told I don't deserve, and if that makes them uncomfortable, if that threatens their carefully maintained hierarchies, That's their problem to solve, not mine. Maris, I know what you're going to say. She held up a hand. That I'm brave, that I'm inspiring. But I don't need platitudes, Adrian. I need you to understand that this moment, this evening, it's not about romance or friendship or whatever our relationship is becoming. It's about reclaiming agency I gave away years ago when I decided invisibility was safer than visibility. Adrian absorbed her words, recognizing the truth in them. He thought of himself as offering Maris an opportunity, but she'd been offering herself something far more valuable, permission to stop hiding. Then I'm honored you chose me to stand beside, he said quietly. Not as protection, as witness. Maris's expression softened slightly. You're learning. Slowly, Adrian admitted, but I'm trying. They stood in comfortable silence, the sounds of the gala drifting through open doors, music and laughter and the clink of crystal on crystal. They're gonna come after you harder now, Maris said eventually. Not just me, you. For bringing me, for defending me, for associating yourself with someone who publicly called out their behavior. Let them. Adrian, I'm serious. These people control board seats, investment opportunities, political connections. They can make your professional life difficult. They can try. Adrian leaned against the railing. But they need me more than I need them. Velcor is valuable because of what we've built, not because of who I know at cocktail parties. If they want to ostracize me for treating you with basic human respect, they're welcome to try. I'll survive. You sound very certain of that. I am. Adrian met her eyes. Because tonight I realized something. I've spent years trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval meant nothing. I've attended events I hated and made small talk with people I didn't respect, played by rules designed to keep people like me, people like us, in our place. And for what? So they tolerate my presence while never truly accepting me? He straightened, energy flowing through him like electricity. I built an $8 billion company because I refused to accept limitations other people tried to impose. I changed an entire industry because I was willing to break rules that no longer served anyone. And I've been letting these people make me feel like I still needed their permission to exist in their world. That ends tonight. Maris studied him carefully. You're serious? Completely. Adrian smiled, a real smile, not the careful diplomatic expression he wore at business functions. They wanted a show? Fine, they got one. But the story they'll tell isn't the one they expected. They thought they'd watch you get humiliated. Instead, they watched you reveal yourself as more accomplished, more generous, and more genuinely powerful than most of them combined. That must be eating them alive. Probably, Maris agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. Though I imagine Richard's version involves me being a social climbing assistant who bought my way into relevance. Let him tell whatever story helps him sleep at night. Everyone else saw the truth. A burst of laughter from inside made them both turn. Through the windows, they could see the gala continuing. People dancing now, the formal program concluded, the event shifting into pure social theater. We should go back in, Maris said without enthusiasm. Or, Adrian countered, we could leave, get actual food instead of miniature sculptures pretending to be appetizers. Talk like humans instead of performing for an audience. Maris's eyes lit up. You'd really walk out of the Harrington Gala before the scheduled end time? Watch me. Adrian offered his arm. Unless you want to stay and receive your adoring masses, those aren't my masses. They're people recalculating their assessment of me based on my bank account. Maris took his arm. I'd much rather get pizza and debrief this absolute chaos of an evening. They moved back through the ballroom, and Adrian noticed the shift immediately. People watch them differently now, with curiosity instead of dismissal, with calculation instead of contempt. Several people moved as if to intercept them, but Adrian steered them efficiently toward the exit. Catherine Harrington caught them at the door. Leaving so soon? Early morning tomorrow, Adrian said smoothly. Thank you for a memorable evening. Indeed, Catherine's smile was knowing. Maris, I hope we'll talk more about the program. I have thoughts about expansion possibilities. I'd welcome that conversation, Maris replied. My office will reach out to schedule something. They escaped into the cool night, valets scrambling to retrieve Adrian's car. While they waited, Vivian emerged from the mansion, her expression calculating.
Maris, darling, she called out, her tone saccharine. I feel terrible about earlier. I didn't realize you were such an accomplished philanthropist. We should have lunch. I'd love to discuss collaboration opportunities. I'm sure you would, Maris replied pleasantly. Unfortunately, I'm quite busy with existing commitments, but thank you for the interest. Vivian's smile tightened. Well, if your schedule opens up, it won't, Maris said simply. But I appreciate the thought. The car arrived, cutting off further conversation. They settled into the back seat, and as soon as the doors closed, Maris started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that shook her shoulders. Did you see her face? Maris gasped between laughs. The absolute shock when I turned her down. Adrian found himself laughing too, tension draining away like water. She expected you to be grateful for the attention. She expected me to scramble for her approval now that I've been revealed as someone worth knowing. Instead, she gets what she gave me earlier, polite dismissal. Maris wiped her eyes carefully, preserving her makeup. I'm going to enjoy that memory for years. The car pulled away from the Harrington estate, leaving behind the glittering lights and poisonous social hierarchies. Adrian felt lighter than he had in months. Pizza? He asked. Pizza, Maris confirmed. The greasiest, most inappropriate for formal wear pizza you know. I know just the place. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, both processing the events of the evening. Finally, Maris spoke. Thank you, she said quietly, for standing beside me instead of in front of me, for trusting that I could handle myself, for not trying to rescue me from situations I chose to walk into. Thank you, Adrian replied, for showing me what real courage looks like, and for reminding me that the only approval that matters comes from people whose judgment you actually respect. Maris reached across the seat and took his hand, a simple gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything that had happened at the gala. We make a good team, she said. We do, Adrian agreed, squeezing her hand gently. The question is, what do we do now? Now? Maris smiled. Now we eat pizza, decompress, and plan how to burn down the rest of the social hierarchies that need destroying. Adrian laughed. Ambitious? You expected anything less? Not even slightly. The car pulled up to a tiny pizzeria Adrian had discovered years ago, long before the money and the mansion and the social obligation. Inside, the owner greeted him by his first name, led them to a corner booth, and didn't bat an eye at Maris's formal gown. They ordered an obscene amount of pizza, shed the formal pretense like uncomfortable coats, and talked until well past midnight. Not about the gala or the people who'd tried to hurt them, but about ideas and dreams and the lives they wanted to build beyond other people's expectations. And somewhere between the second slice and the third, Adrian realized that everything had changed. The woman sitting across from him wasn't his assistant, wasn't his guest, wasn't someone he needed to protect or defend. She was simply Maris. Brilliant, fierce, uncompromising Maris. And he was absolutely, terrifyingly in love with her. The revelation sat heavy in Adrian's chest as he drove Maris home just past 1 in the morning, her heels dangling from one hand, pizza box balanced on her lap for the leftovers she'd insisted on keeping. She hummed softly along with the radio, completely unaware that his entire understanding of their relationship had just reorganized itself into something terrifying and exhilarating. He didn't say anything, couldn't, because acknowledging feelings this intense for someone who worked for him felt like crossing a line professionally drawn in permanent ink. Besides, Maris had been clear tonight wasn't about romance, it was about reclaiming power. The last thing she needed was her boss confusing solidarity with something more complicated. So Adrian swallowed the words threatening to escape and simply drove, cataloging small details he'd somehow missed before. The way Maris's laugh started quietly, then built to something unreserved. The precise angle she tilted her head when thinking deeply. The unconscious grace in how she moved, even exhausted and barefoot. You're quiet, Maris observed as they pulled up to her building. Second thoughts about burning down social hierarchies? Just processing, Adrian replied, managing a smile. It's been an eventful night. That's an understatement. Maris gathered her belongings. Thank you, Adrian, for all of it, for trusting me to handle myself, for standing beside me when it would have been easier to distance yourself, for being exactly who I needed you to be. The words landed with unexpected weight. Adrian met her eyes, seeing warmth there that made his chest ache. "Anytime," he said, meaning it more deeply than she could possibly know. Maris hesitated, hand on the door handle. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or the beginning of a question. Then it passed, replaced by her usual composure. "See you Monday," she said, and disappeared into her building before Adrian could respond. He sat in the car for several minutes afterward, staring at the darkened windows of her apartment, before finally driving home to his empty penthouse and the sleepless night he knew was waiting. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Adrian's phone started buzzing at 6:30 with calls from board members, investors, and business associates who'd either attended the gala or heard about it secondhand. He ignored them all, showering and dressing with mechanical precision, trying to prepare mentally for whatever fallout awaited. When he arrived at the office at 7:45, Maris was already at her desk, looking as composed as ever in a navy suit that suggested nothing extraordinary had happened Friday night. "Good morning," she said, handing him his coffee. "You have 17 messages flagged urgent, a dozen interview requests from business publications, and Senator Michaels wants to discuss optics and appropriate professional boundaries. I've scheduled nothing until you've had a chance to review the situation." Adrian took the coffee gratefully. "How bad is it?" "Depends on your definition of bad." Maris pulled up her tablet. "The business community is divided. Half think you made a brilliant strategic move bringing me to the gala, showing you value substance over superficial social connections. The other half think you've damaged your reputation by defying social conventions. The gossip columns are having a field day with headlines like, 'Tech Billionaire's Assistant Stuns Elite Circle,' and 'From Boardroom to Ballroom, the Cinderella Story That Wasn't.'" And personally, Maris met his eyes. "I've received 43 LinkedIn requests, 15 direct job offers from competitors, and 7 invitations to join philanthropic boards. Also, Richard Ashford's office called to inform me I'm no longer welcome at the Metropolitan Club. Since I've never been to the Metropolitan Club and had no intention of going, I'm not particularly devastated." Despite the tension, Adrian laughed. Richard works fast. He's also been calling board members at Vailcore, suggesting you've become emotionally compromised and questioning your judgment. Maris's tone remained neutral, but Adrian caught the flash of anger in her eyes. "Marcus Vandermeer apparently agrees and is pushing for a review of your leadership decision." Adrian felt cold fury settle in his gut. "They're going after my company because I took you to a party. They're going after your company because you challenged their social order and I had the audacity to be more accomplished than they expected." Maris set down her tablet. "Adrian, you need to consider the implications carefully. These people control significant investment capital and political influence. If they unite against Vailcore, let them try." Adrian's voice came out harder than intended. "I'm not apologizing for treating you with basic human respect. And I'm certainly not going to pretend Friday night was a mistake to appease people whose approval I never wanted in the first place." "I'm not asking you to apologize." Maris stood, moving around her desk to face him directly. "I'm asking you to think strategically. Your company has 4,300 employees whose livelihoods depend on Vailcore's success. Throwing away political capital and investor relationships to make a point, however justified, could have consequences beyond just your social standing." Adrian studied her carefully. "Are you suggesting I distance myself from you professionally?" "I'm suggesting you calculate the cost." Maris held his gaze. "If defending me damages Vailcore, then the rational choice is to minimize the association. Release a statement saying I attended as a friend, that our professional relationship remains unchanged, that personal social choices don't reflect company policy. It would give the board ammunition to defend you with, and throw you to the wolves in the process." "I can handle wolves, Adrian. I've been doing it my entire career." Maris's expression softened slightly. "But I can't handle being the reason your company suffers. If you need to create distance for Vailcore's sake, I'll understand. I'll even help you craft the messaging." Adrian felt something fierce and protective surge through him. "No." "Adrian, no." He set down his coffee with careful control. "I'm not releasing statements or creating distance or pretending Friday night was anything other than what it was. Me choosing to attend an event with someone I respect and value, and watching her prove herself more worthy of admiration than everyone else in that room combined.
If the board has concerns, they can address them directly. If investors want to pull funding over my personal associations, then they never understood what Veilcore represents in the first place.
You're risking everything you've built. I'm protecting what matters. Adrian moved closer, needing her to understand. Veilcore exists because I refuse to accept arbitrary limitations. Because I built something that prioritized innovation over tradition, merit over connection. If I back down now, if I let them dictate who I can associate with based on job titles or social hierarchies, then I'm betraying everything the company stands for. Maris was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. You're sure about this? Completely. Adrian paused, then added more quietly, but I need to know you're sure, because the scrutiny is only going to intensify. They'll dig into your background, question every decision you've made, look for anything they can use to undermine your credibility. It's going to get ugly. It was always going to get ugly, Maris replied. That's what happens when you challenge power structures. They fight back. The question is whether you're willing to fight harder. Are you? Maris smiled, that fierce, uncompromising smile that had first made Adrian realize she was far more than her job title suggested. I didn't spend $12 million building a healthcare initiative and 18 months preparing for Friday night to back down now. If they want to fight, I'll give them one. The tension between them shifted, becoming something electric and purposeful. Adrian felt the foundation of their relationship cracking, old definitions becoming inadequate for whatever was emerging. Before he could examine the feeling too closely, his office door opened and Catherine Chen, Veilcore's chief legal officer, entered looking grim. We need to talk, Catherine said without preamble. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Marcus van der Meer is pushing hard for a vote of no confidence. Adrian's stomach dropped. On what grounds? Compromised judgment? Inappropriate personal relationships affecting professional decision-making, creating PR risks that could damage shareholder value. Catherine's expression was carefully neutral. It's thin legally, but politically it's gaining traction. 3 board members are definitely with Marcus. 4 are firmly in your corner. The other 2 are undecided. Who's undecided? Maris asked, pulling up information on her tablet with practiced efficiency.
Patricia Thornwell and James Morrison, Catherine replied. Both are old guard types who value social connections. The Gala fallout makes them nervous. Adrian's mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles and counter moves. What's our strongest defense? Company performance, Catherine said immediately. Veilcore stock is up 37% this year. Revenue exceeded projections by 18%. We've launched 3 major products successfully and acquired 2 competitors. By every objective measure, your leadership has been exceptional. The compromised judgment argument falls apart when confronted with actual results. But perception matters in boardrooms, Maris interjected. Even if Adrian's professional decisions are sound, the appearance of impropriety could be enough to sway undecided votes, especially if Marcus frames this as protecting the company's reputation. Catherine nodded. Which is why we need to control the narrative. Adrian, you need to address the board directly. Acknowledge that you attended a social event with Maris, but make it clear that your personal associations have 0 impact on business operations. Emphasize her qualifications, her professional value to Veilcore, and the complete separation between your social life and company decisions.
That makes it sound like I'm apologizing for treating her like a human being, Adrian objected. You're not apologizing, Catherine corrected. You're providing context that diffuses their argument. You're showing that you understand professional boundaries while defending your right to choose your own social circle. It's strategic, not capitulation. Adrian looked at Maris, who was studying her tablet with intense focus. What do you think? I think Catherine's right about the strategy, Maris said slowly. But I also think you need to prepare for the possibility that this vote happens regardless of your defense. Marcus wants you out. He's wanted control of Veilcore since the IPO. This is just the excuse he's been waiting for. Then we need to ensure the undecided votes stay undecided until we can sway them properly, Catherine said. Patricia responds to data and logic. James responds to personal appeals and loyalty arguments. We have 8 hours to build cases that speak to both. The next several hours blurred into intensive preparation. Adrian, Catherine, and Maris worked in rapid coordination,
building presentation materials that highlighted Veilcore's performance metrics, documented Adrian's track record of sound business judgment, and strategically positioned the gala attendance as irrelevant to professional competence.
Around noon, Patricia Thornwell called Adrian directly. "I want to hear your side before this afternoon's circus," Patricia said without preamble. She was 72, ruthlessly intelligent, and one of the few board members Adrian genuinely respected. Marcus is painting a picture of a CEO who's lost focus, lost sight of what matters. Is he right? What matters? Adrian repeated.
Company performance, innovation, growth, market position? Because by every one of those metrics, Veilcore is stronger than it's ever been. I'm not talking about quarterly reports, Patricia said sharply. I'm talking about judgment, leadership, the ability to separate personal impulses from professional obligations. Marcus says you brought your assistant to the most prestigious social event of the season and created a PR nightmare in the process. He says it demonstrates poor risk assessment and compromised decision-making. So convince me he's wrong. Adrian took a breath, choosing his words carefully. 3 years ago, I hired Maris Bennett because she had an MIT degree, 5 years of experience optimizing corporate operations, and recommendations that described her as the most competent professional her previous employers had ever worked with. Since then, she streamlined our administrative processes, saved the company approximately $14 million through efficiency improvements, and handled confidential information with absolute discretion. She's extraordinary at her job. None of which explains why you took her to the Harrington Gala as your guest, Patricia countered. Because she's also my friend, Adrian said simply. Because I value her perspective and her company. Because I'm tired of attending events surrounded by people who see me as an opportunity rather than a person. And because when I asked her to attend, I didn't consider how it would be perceived by people whose approval I've never particularly cared about. That last part is the problem, Patricia said. You should care, Adrian. Not because those people matter personally, but because they control resources that matter professionally. Board seats, investment partnerships, political connections that smooth regulatory pathways. You've spent years building relationships with these people precisely because they're useful, even if you don't like them. Throwing that away for one evening wasn't throwing anything away, Adrian interrupted. It was choosing differently, choosing to prioritize authenticity over strategy for once. And what happened? Maris revealed herself as a more significant philanthropist than most of the people who spent the evening judging her. She demonstrated intelligence, composure, and grace under circumstances that would have broken someone less capable. The only people who came out of Friday night looking bad were the ones who treated her with contempt, based on assumptions they never bothered to verify. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Marcus says you're in love with her, that you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. The accusation hit harder than Adrian expected, partially because he couldn't honestly deny it. What I feel personally is irrelevant to my ability to run this company. My decisions as CEO are based on data, market analysis, and strategic planning. My social life is my own business. The two don't intersect. Don't they? Patricia pressed. If this assistant, this friend, if she influences your thinking, affects your choices, creates conflicts between what's good for her and what's good for Veilcore, then I would recuse myself from decisions where conflicts exist, Adrian said firmly. Just as I would for any personal relationship, just as board members do constantly when their investments or connections create potential conflicts. I'm not exempt from professional ethics, Patricia, but I'm also not going to apologize for having a life outside these office walls. Another pause. Then Patricia said, send me the performance data Catherine's been compiling, all of it. I want to see exactly how well Veilcore's actually doing underneath this social drama. And Adrian, this better be worth it. Because if you're gambling the company you built on a woman, any woman, you're not the leader I thought you were. The line went dead before Adrian could respond. He set down his phone, hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. Maris appeared in his doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Patricia's not convinced yet. No, Adrian agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. But she's willing to look at the data. That's something. It's also a test. Maris settled into the chair across from his desk. She's measuring whether your judgment holds up under scrutiny, whether you can defend your choices with logic instead of just defiance. And can I? Objectively? Yes, Velcor's performance speaks for itself. Your leadership decisions have been consistently sound. There's no evidence your personal life has compromised your professional effectiveness. Maris paused. But Marcus isn't arguing evidence. He's arguing perception, and perception is harder to counter with data. Adrian leaned back, exhaustion seeping through his adrenaline. How did we get here? 48 hours ago, we were eating pizza and laughing. Now I'm fighting to keep control of my own company. Because you challenged people who aren't accustomed to being challenged, Maris said quietly, and they're responding the way threatened power always responds, by attacking the challenger's legitimacy. It's not about Friday night, Adrian. It's about you refusing to stay in the box they built for you. The self-made outsider who should be grateful for their tolerance? Exactly, Maris met his eyes. They let you into their world because you were useful, wealthy enough to be worth knowing, successful enough to add prestige to their events, but still fundamentally other. Still someone who should defer to their social authority, even if you exceeded their business acumen. By bringing me, by refusing to accept their hierarchy, you reminded them that you were never really one of them, and that terrifies them. Adrian felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. So what do? We win the vote, Maris said simply. We convince Patricia and James that your leadership is irreplaceable regardless of who you socialize with. We make Marcus look petty and threatened instead of protected. And we remind everyone in that boardroom that Velcor exists because you refuse to accept limitations others tried to impose. And if we lose, Maris's expression hardened. Then you rebuild. Start over. Create something new that doesn't require their approval. But we're not going to lose, Adrian, because you're better than all of them combined, and I'm going to make sure they can't ignore that. The fierce certainty in her voice steadied something inside him. Adrian reached across the desk, covering her hand with his. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Maris agreed, but her fingers tightened around his. But you've got me anyway, so stop wasting energy on self-doubt and start preparing to fight. The afternoon board meeting convened at 3 o'clock in Velcor's top-floor conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, sunlight streaming through glass onto a mahogany table where 9 board members sat in varying states of tension. Marcus Vandermeer occupied the far end, flanked by 2 allies whose expressions broadcast their intention before anyone spoke. Patricia Thornwell sat near the middle, tablet in hand, face unreadable. James Morrison looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Adrian entered with Catherine at his side, Maris notably absent for Catherine's strategic advice. Better to keep her out of the room, avoid giving Marcus ammunition about inappropriate influence. Thank you all for gathering on short notice, Marcus began, not waiting for Adrian to take control of his own board meeting. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Adrian's recent behavior has created significant reputation risks for Velcor, and we need to address them before they impact shareholder value. What behavior specifically? Patricia asked, her tone crisp. Be precise, Marcus. His decision to bring his executive assistant to the Harrington Gala as a personal guest, Marcus said, creating the appearance of an inappropriate relationship between CEO and subordinate, generating gossip that reflects poorly on the company, demonstrating judgment that prioritizes personal gratification over corporate image. Has this inappropriate relationship affected any business decisions? Patricia pressed. Has company performance suffered? Have there been complaints of favoritism or ethics violations? Marcus hesitated. Not yet. But the potential? I'm not interested in potential, Patricia interrupted. I'm interested in facts. Has Adrian's personal association with his assistant created any measurable negative impact on Velcor's operations, finances, or market position? The negative impact is to our reputation, Marcus insisted. Our connections with investors who value social propriety. Our standing in circles that matter for what? This from James Morrison, speaking up unexpectedly. For cocktail party invitations? Marcus, I've known Adrian for 7 years. I've watched him build this company from nothing into a market leader. I've never seen him make a business decision based on emotion or compromise company interests for personal gain. One social event doesn't change that track record. Marcus's face reddened. This isn't about one event. It's about a pattern of behavior suggesting Adrian has lost focus, lost the hunger that made Veilcore successful. He's become complacent, prioritizing his social life over the company that made him wealthy.
Our revenue is up 37%, Adrian said quietly, speaking for the first time. We exceeded every projection this quarter, launched 3 products that are outperforming competitors, acquired 2 companies that strengthen our market position. Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Customer retention is up. Innovation pipeline is stronger than ever.
Exactly which part of that suggests complacency or lost focus?
The part where you're sleeping with your assistant, Marcus snapped, losing control of his carefully constructed argument. The room went silent. Catherine tensed beside Adrian, preparing for the legal implications of Marcus's accusation. That's a serious allegation, Patricia said, ice in her voice. Do you have evidence supporting it? Marcus faltered.
I'm saying there's an appearance
you've created through innuendo and speculation, Patricia cut him off. Unless you have actual evidence of an inappropriate relationship, you're engaging in defamation that could expose both you and this board to significant liability. Catherine, would you agree? Catherine nodded. Making unfounded accusations of sexual impropriety could constitute defamation per se. It's actionable both personally and corporately.
I strongly advise against continuing this line of argument without substantial proof.
Marcus's allies shifted uncomfortably. This was going sideways fast. Let me be very clear, Adrian said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. Maris Bennett is my executive assistant. She's also my friend. I invited her to the Harrington Gala because I value her company and wanted to attend with someone I could actually talk to instead of performing for an audience I don't respect. What happened that evening was that Maris revealed herself as a significant philanthropist who's accomplished more meaningful work than most people in that room. The only ones who came out looking bad were those who judged her based on assumptions rather than facts. He stood, moving to the windows, needing the physical distance to maintain composure. You want to talk about judgment? Let's talk about it. I've spent years building relationships with people like the Vandermeers and the Lasseters because I was told they mattered. Because their approval supposedly opened doors and smoothed pathways. But what have those relationships actually produced? Richard Ashford tried to poach our best engineers last year. Vivian Lasseter spread rumors about our expansion plans to competitors. Marcus himself has been quietly buying Veilcore stock through shell companies, positioning himself for a hostile takeover attempt. Patricia's head snapped toward Marcus. Is that true? Marcus's silence was answer enough. So when you talk about my judgment being compromised, Adrian continued, turning back to face the room, what you really mean is that I stopped pretending to value relationships with people who've never had my best interests at heart. I chose to spend one evening with someone who's proven her loyalty and competence over 3 years instead of people who see me as either a threat or an opportunity. That's not poor judgment. That's clarity. It's also irrelevant to whether you can effectively lead this company. Marcus tried again, desperately clawing back to his original argument. Your personal drama is creating distractions we can't afford. The only distraction is this meeting, James Morrison said firmly. Adrian's right. Veilcore's performance is exceptional. There's no evidence of compromised leadership. All I see is a CEO who had the audacity to attend a party with someone outside the approved social circle and a board member using that as pretext for a power grab. I'm not supporting this vote of no confidence. Patricia nodded slowly. Neither am I. Adrian's personal life is his own business as long as it doesn't affect his professional performance. Since every metric suggests his performance is excellent, I see no grounds for questioning his leadership. This meeting is over. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. You're making a mistake. He's compromised. It's only a matter of time before this woman influences decisions that hurt the company. This woman has a name, Adrian said coldly, and she's done more for Veilcore than you ever have. If you have genuine concerns about company performance, bring data, bring evidence. Bring something beyond social prejudice and territorial insecurity. Otherwise, save everyone's time and resign from the board so we can replace you with someone who actually cares about Veilcore's success. Marcus's face went purple with rage. He stalked from the room, his 2 allies trailing behind, leaving 6 board members who looked varying degrees of relieved or uncomfortable. Patricia stood gathering her materials. Adrian, a word. They moved to the corner of the conference room while others filed out. Catherine remained nearby, protective and vigilant. "You won today," Patricia said quietly. "But Marcus isn't finished. He'll regroup, find new angles to attack from. You need to be prepared for that." "I know. And you need to be honest with yourself about what's happening between you and Maris Bennett." Patricia's sharp eyes missed nothing.
Because if there's more there than friendship, it will eventually create complications, conflicts of interest, difficult decisions about her role in the company. You should start thinking about those possibilities now, before they become problems. Adrian met her gaze steadily. "I appreciate the advice." "That's not acceptance, it's deflection." Patricia almost smiled. "But it's your life. Just remember, leadership requires sacrifice sometimes, including sacrificing what you want for what's necessary. Don't forget that in pursuit of what feels good right now." She left him standing there, her words echoing uncomfortably in his mind. Catherine approached once they were alone. "You handled that well." Marcus overplayed his hand, made it personal instead of professional. Patricia's right though, he'll be back. "I know." Adrian exhaled slowly, adrenaline finally fading to leave exhaustion in its wake. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything today." "Thank Maris," Catherine replied. "She's the one who put together half the data that won Patricia over. And she's waiting in your office, by the way, looking anxious despite her best poker face." Adrian found Maris exactly where Catherine said, standing at his windows, staring out at the city with tension visible in her shoulders. She turned when he entered, questions in her eyes. "We won," Adrian said simply. The relief that flooded Maris's expression was profound. "Patricia and James voted with you?" "They refused to support the no-confidence vote." Marcus stormed out. "It's over. For now." Maris crossed to him, and before Adrian could process what was happening, she pulled him into a fierce hug. The contact was electric, her arms tight around him, her face pressed briefly against his shoulder, the subtle scent of her perfume overwhelming his senses. Then she pulled back, professional distance reasserting itself, but her hands remained on his arms.
"Thank you," she said quietly, "for not backing down, for not sacrificing me to make this easy, for choosing the hard path because it was the right one." "I couldn't do anything else," Adrian replied, acutely aware of how close she stood, how easy it would be to close the remaining distance and kiss her. "You matter too much."
Something shifted in Maris's expression, awareness dawning in her eyes, questions forming that Adrian wasn't ready to answer because answering them honestly meant acknowledging feelings that could complicate everything they just fought to preserve. So instead he stepped back, creating necessary distance, and said, "We should celebrate. Dinner. Somewhere that doesn't serve tiny portions on oversized plates." Maris held his gaze for a beat longer, then nodded. "It sounds perfect." But as they gathered their things and prepared to leave the office behind, Adrian couldn't shake Patricia's warning echoing in his mind. Leadership requires sacrifice sometimes, including sacrificing what you want for what's necessary. And he wondered how long he could keep pretending that what he wanted and what was necessary weren't already on a collision course with no clear resolution in sight. They ended up at the same pizzeria where they debriefed after the gala, both of them needing the comfort of familiar surroundings after the day's battle. The owner recognized them immediately, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Back so soon?" he asked, leading them to the same corner booth. "Must have been good last time." "The best," Maris replied, and Adrian caught the double meaning in her words. Not just the food, but the entire evening they'd shared here. They ordered without looking at menus, falling into easy conversation that carefully avoided the tension still hovering between them. Maris talked about the healthcare initiative's next phase, her eyes lighting up as she described expansion plans for 3 additional cities. Adrian shared details about a new product launch, watching her process technical specifications with the same sharp intelligence she brought to everything. But underneath the comfortable dialogue, something had shifted. Adrian found himself cataloging details with painful awareness. The way Candlelight caught in Maris's hair, the precise curve of her smile, the sound of her laugh when he made an observation that surprised her. Every moment felt weighted with significance he couldn't acknowledge. "You're doing it again," Maris said eventually, pulling him from his thoughts. "Doing what?" "Getting quiet, disappearing into your head." She tilted her head, studying him with unsettling perception. "What are you thinking about?"
everything, Adrian wanted to say. How you've become essential to my life in ways that terrify me. How I can't imagine facing another day without you. How I'm falling in love with you and have no idea what to do about it. Instead, he said, Patricia's warning about complications and conflicts of interest. Maris's expression grew more serious. She's not wrong. If our relationship changed, if it became something other than professional, it would create issues. HR, concerns, perception problems, legitimate questions about favoritism and appropriate boundaries. Adrian picked at his pizza, appetite fading. Which is why it can't change. The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Maris was very still, her dark eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Is that what you want? She asked quietly. For things to stay exactly as they are? The question landed like a challenge. Adrian met her gaze, seeing his own confusion reflected back at him. What I want doesn't matter, he said finally. What matters is protecting Veilcore, protecting you, making sure that what we fought for today doesn't get undermined by choices that give Marcus ammunition. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give right now. Adrian set down his slice, needing to make her understand even if he couldn't fully articulate why. Maris, we just survived a board meeting where I was accused of compromising my judgment because of you. If we actually became involved, if there was truth to what Marcus implied, it would validate every accusation, prove that my personal feelings do affect professional decisions. We can't give them that. Maris was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of her water glass. When she spoke, her voice carried a careful neutrality that somehow hurt worse than anger would have. You're right, she said. Logically, you're absolutely right. Getting involved would create complications neither of us needs. It would change the power dynamics between us in ways that could never be fully resolved as long as I work for you. It would invite scrutiny and judgment that would undermine everything we've accomplished. So yes, maintaining professional boundaries makes perfect sense. But? Adrian heard the unspoken word hanging in the air. But logic doesn't change how things feel. Maris met his eyes, and Adrian saw vulnerability there that she rarely showed. And pretending feelings don't exist because they're inconvenient, that's not sustainable long term. Eventually something breaks. Adrian felt his chest constrict. Are you saying you want to leave Veilcore? I'm saying we're avoiding a conversation we need to have because we're both afraid of where it might lead. Maris leaned forward slightly. Adrian, I've spent 3 years being your assistant, being professional and appropriate and carefully maintaining boundaries. And somewhere in that time, those boundaries started feeling less like protection and more like prison yard. Friday night wasn't just about reclaiming visibility. It was about admitting that what we have, whatever this is between us, it matters more than job titles or professional hierarchy. Mary, let me finish. Her voice remained steady, but Adrian could hear the emotion beneath. I'm not asking you to make declarations or change anything right now. I'm just asking you to stop pretending you don't feel it too. Because I see how you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I notice when you find excuses to work late because you know I'll be here. I feel the weight of everything unsaid every time we're in the same room. Adrian couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the pounding of his heart and the terrifying relief of having truth spoken aloud after months of careful avoidance. I do feel it, he said quietly, and it terrifies me. Because wanting you and having you are two different things, and the gap between them is filled with consequences I don't know how to navigate. My company, your career, the ammunition it would give people who already want to destroy what we've built. I can't risk that. I can't risk you. What if I'm willing to take that risk? You shouldn't have to. Adrian's hands clenched into fists on the table. You've worked too hard, accomplished too much, to have it all reduced to gossip about the assistant who slept her way into the CEO's life. That's what they'd say, Maris. No matter how brilliant you are, no matter what you've achieved, they'd dismiss everything because it's easier than acknowledging you earned your place. And if I don't care what they say, I care. The words came out more forcefully than intended. I care that you'd be subjected to that. I care that everything you've built would be questioned and diminished. I care that choosing me might cost you opportunities you deserve. Maris reached across the table, covering his clenched fist with her hand. You don't get to make that choice for me, Adrian.
You don't get to decide what I'm willing to sacrifice or what price I'm willing to pay. That's my decision, my risk to take or not take. Then what are we doing? Adrian's voice cracked slightly. Because I can't be with you while you work for me. The ethics alone, power dynamic, it's impossible to navigate cleanly. Someone always gets hurt in situations like this. So we changed the situation. Maris's grip tightened on his hand. I could leave Vailcourt, take one of those job offers I mentioned, or start my own consulting firm. Remove the professional complication entirely. You'd give up your position for this? For something that might not even work? I'd give up a job title for a chance at something real. Maris's eyes blazed with certainty. Adrian, I've spent my entire adult life being careful, playing it safe, making myself small and invisible to survive in corporate spaces that weren't built for people like me. And I'm tired. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of letting fear of what might happen prevent me from pursuing what actually matters. Adrian felt something crack open inside him, resistance crumbling against the force of her conviction. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it fails, and you've given up everything for nothing? Then I'll have tried. Maris smiled, fierce and beautiful. And I'll have learned something, and I'll move forward knowing I chose possibility over safety. That's not nothing, Adrian. That's how people actually live instead of just existing. The truth of her words settled into Adrian's bones, rearranging his understanding of risk and reward. He'd built an empire by refusing to accept limitations, by betting everything on possibilities others dismissed as impossible. When had he become so afraid of applying that same courage to his personal life? I'm in love with you, he said quietly, the words escaping before he could stop them. I think I have been for months, maybe longer, and it's terrified me because I didn't know how to have you without destroying everything we've both worked for. Maris's expression softened, vulnerability and strength coexisting in her smile. I'm in love with you too, which is why we need to figure this out instead of pretending it isn't happening. How? Adrian's voice was raw with hope and fear in equal measures. How do we do this without creating exactly the mess Patricia warned about? Carefully, Maris pulled her hand back, immediately shifting into the strategic thinking that made her so extraordinary at her job. First, I give notice at Vailcourt. 2 weeks, professional and clean. I've already had multiple job offers. I accept one of them, or I start my own firm. Either way, I remove the professional conflict. I don't want you to leave. I know, but it's necessary. Maris's tone was firm. As long as I'm your employee, anything between us is compromised by power dynamics we can't eliminate. Once I'm not working for you, we're on equal footing. We can explore this without ethics violations or HR nightmares. Adrian's mind raced through implications and consequences. Marcus will see it as proof that he was right, that you influenced my decisions. Let him think whatever he wants. The alternative is letting fear of his judgment dictate our lives. Maris leaned back, her expression determined. Besides, once I'm gone, you can hire someone equally competent. The company doesn't fall apart because I leave. It proves that Vailcourt's success is based on your leadership and the entire team's work, not on one assistant, however brilliant she might be. You're really willing to do this. I'm really willing to do this. Maris met his eyes steadily. Are you? Adrian thought about the path ahead. The complications and scrutiny, the questions and judgments, the risk that after everything they might discover, they worked better as colleagues than as partners. He thought about Patricia's warning about sacrifice and leadership. He thought about Marcus's smug satisfaction at being proven right. Then he thought about Maris, her fierce intelligence, her uncompromising integrity, the way she made him feel less alone in crowded rooms. He thought about late nights working together, about her laugh in dark pizzerias, about the possibility of building something real with someone who saw him completely and chose him anyway. Yes, he said, I'm willing. The smile that lit Maris's face was worth every risk they were about to take. They talked for hours, working through logistics and timelines with the same efficiency they brought to business challenges. Maris would give notice Friday, providing 2 weeks to train her replacement. She'd already been approached by a consulting firm that specialized in corporate efficiency. She'd reach out to them about a position that would give her flexibility and prestige without the subordinate role that complicated things at Vailcourt. We should wait until you're officially gone before making this public, Adrian said. Give it a month or two. Let the dust settle from the board meeting and your departure. Then if we start appearing together socially, it's just two professionals who happen to be dating. Agreed. Maris pulled out her phone, making notes with characteristic precision. Though we should also prepare for the inevitable speculation. People will assume we were involved the whole time, that the gala was evidence of an existing relationship rather than the beginning of one. Let them assume we'll know the truth. And Catherine should probably know the truth too, Maris added, before I give notice, so she can advise on any legal implications or HR concerns we haven't considered. Adrian nodded, appreciating Maris's thoroughness even as his heart raced with the reality of what they were planning. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated and strategic, which somehow made it feel more significant. They were choosing each other with full awareness of the costs and complications. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Good. Maris reached for his hand again. Means it matters. Means you're taking it seriously instead of treating it like another calculated business risk. Fear is appropriate when you're betting on something that could actually hurt if it fails. Very reassuring. I'm not here to reassure you. I'm here to be honest with you. Maris squeezed his hand gently. This might not work, Adrian. We might discover that what works in an office doesn't translate to a relationship. We might drive each other crazy without professional boundaries to hide behind. We might realize we were better as colleagues than partners. Those are all real possibilities. Then why are we doing this? Because the possibility that it might work, that we might actually build something real and lasting, that possibility is worth the risk of failure. Because I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to reach for it.
Adrian felt something settle in his chest, certainty crystallizing out of chaos. When did you get so wise? About the same time I stopped caring whether people thought I deserved to be in the room. Maris smiled. Turns out, once you stop performing for other people's approval, you get a lot clearer about what actually matters. They finished their pizza in comfortable silence, the weight of their decision balanced by relief at finally speaking truth aloud.
When Adrian drove Maris home that night, he walked her to her door for the first time, hyper-aware of the significance in small gestures. 2 weeks, Maris said at her doorstep. Then everything changes. Everything already changed, Adrian replied. We're just making it official. Maris rose on her toes and pressed a brief, soft kiss to his cheek, close enough to his mouth to make his breath catch, distant enough to preserve the boundaries they were still technically maintaining. Good night, Adrian. Good night, Maris. He watched her disappear inside, then sat in his car for several minutes, touching his cheek where her lips had been, feeling like a teenager after a first date instead of a 37-year-old billionaire who'd just survived a corporate coup attempt. The next morning, Adrian arrived at the office to find Maris already at her desk, looking as professionally composed as ever. Nothing in her demeanor suggested the conversation they'd had the night before. She handed him his coffee, reviewed his schedule, and managed his morning meetings with the same quiet efficiency she always brought to her work. But when their eyes met over shared documents, Adrian saw warmth there that had always existed but was no longer carefully hidden. Saw acknowledgement to what they were building toward. Saw future possibility existing alongside present professionalism. Catherine appeared mid-morning, closing Adrian's office door behind her with the gravity that meant serious conversation ahead. We need to talk about Maris, Catherine said without preamble. Adrian's stomach dropped. What about her? I've been doing damage control with the board, and Patricia asked pointed questions about your relationship. She's concerned that yesterday's defense of Maris was personal rather than professional. Catherine settled into a chair, her expression carefully neutral. I assured her everything was above board, but she's watching closely. Any hint that there's something inappropriate happening will give Marcus exactly what he needs for round 2. Adrian took a breath, recognizing the moment for what it was: truth or continued deception. Maris is giving notice on Friday. Catherine blinked, clearly not expecting that response. She's leaving Vailcore? Why? Did someone offer her a better position? Several people did, actually, but she's leaving primarily to remove a conflict of interest. Adrian met Catherine's eyes steadily. Because once she's no longer working here, there's no professional barrier to us pursuing a personal relationship. The silence that followed was profound. Catherine processed the information with visible care, her legal mind clearly working through implications. "You're in love with her," she said finally. Not a question. "Yes." "And she feels the same way?" "Yes." "How long?" "I don't know exactly," Adrian admitted. "Months, probably. But we never acted on it while she worked here, never crossed any lines. What Marcus implied in the board meeting, that wasn't true then, but I want it to be true eventually, and the only ethical way forward is for Maris to leave first." Catherine leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. "From a legal standpoint, this is actually the cleanest approach. By removing the employment relationship before beginning a romantic one, you avoid harassment claims, favoritism accusations, and most HR complications. It's strategic. It's also terrifying," Adrian said. "She's giving up her position, her stability at Belcourt, for a relationship that might not work." "That's her choice to make." Catherine's tone softened slightly. "Adrian, I've worked with you for 5 years. I've watched you build this company, fight hostile takeover attempts, navigate regulatory nightmares and market crashes. You're brilliant at business, but you've also been profoundly lonely. If Maris makes you less alone, if she brings something to your life beyond professional competence, then this risk might be the smartest thing you've ever done. Or the stupidest." "Often the same thing," Catherine stood. "I'll make sure the transition is handled properly from an HR perspective. 2 weeks notice, full documentation, professional references. And Adrian? Once she's gone, wait a reasonable time before going public. Give it at least 6 weeks. Let the board forget about her. Let Marcus find something else to obsess over. Then when you start dating openly, it looks like a natural development between two professionals, not proof of an existing affair. That's what we planned." "Good." Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I like her. She's smart, capable, and she doesn't take your nonsense. You could do a lot worse." After Catherine left, Adrian found himself staring at his computer screen without seeing it, mind spinning through everything that was about to change. Friday felt simultaneously too far away and much too soon. The week passed in strange suspension. Maris worked with her usual precision, training her potential replacement while managing Adrian's schedule with the efficiency that had made her invaluable. But in quiet moments, brief exchanges in his office, late evenings when the staff had gone home, they allowed themselves glimpses of what was coming. Hands touching when passing documents, smiles that lasted too long, conversations that drifted from professional to personal and back again. Friday morning arrived with the inevitability of sunrise. Adrian watched Maris enter his office carrying her formal resignation letter, her expression calm but eyes betraying emotion beneath the professional facade. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately, she said, handing him the envelope. "I've documented all ongoing projects and created transition protocols for my replacement. Catherine has the details for HR processing." Adrian accepted the letter without opening it, knowing what it said, needing this moment to feel real. "You're sure about this?" "Completely." Maris held his gaze. "This is the right choice, Adrian, for both of us. I'm going to miss working with you. You'll still see me." A slight smile curved her lips. "Just in different contexts, hopefully with less corporate drama and more actual conversation." "That sounds perfect." Maris moved toward the door, then paused. 2 weeks. Then everything changes. "I'm counting on it," Adrian replied, and watched her return to her desk to begin the process of extracting herself from the role she'd occupied for 3 years. News of Maris's resignation spread quickly through Belcourt's executive rank. People expressed surprise. She'd seemed so integral to operations, so permanently positioned. Adrian deflected questions about why she was leaving, offering generic responses about new opportunities and career growth while Catherine handled the official HR narrative. Marcus called within hours, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard your assistant is leaving. Such a shame, though probably for the best, given the complications her presence was creating. I'm sure you'll find someone more appropriate for the position." "I'm sure I will," Adrian replied evenly, refusing to give Marcus the satisfaction of a reaction. "Must be difficult, though, losing someone you've become so dependent on." "Maris is irreplaceable in many ways, but Belcourt will survive. We always do." "Indeed." Marcus's tone shifted, becoming sharper. "Just between us, Adrian. Was I right?"
About the nature of your relationship with her? You were right that she matters to me, Adrian said carefully.
But the timeline you implied was fiction. Nothing inappropriate happened while she worked here. She's leaving to pursue other opportunities, and I wish her well. That's the entire story. If you say so, Marcus didn't sound convinced. Though it's interesting timing, don't you think? Right after a board meeting where her influence was questioned, suddenly she's resigning. Almost like you realized I was onto something and decided to eliminate the problem before it damaged you further. Think whatever helps you sleep at night, Marcus.
I'm done justifying my choices to you. Adrian hung up before Marcus could respond,
Hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. But underneath the fury was something else, anticipation. Because in 2 weeks, Maris would be free from Valecor's constraints. And then they could start building something new. Something that belonged to them alone. Beyond the reach of people like Marcus, who measured worth in bloodlines and social hierarchy. Something real. Maris's final 2 weeks at Valecor passed with bittersweet efficiency. She trained her replacement, a competent woman named Jennifer, who had excellent credentials but lacked the intuitive understanding of Adrian's working style that Maris had developed over 3 years. Adrian watched Maris walk Jennifer through complex protocols and sensitive client relationships, feeling the loss acutely, even though he knew what waited on the other side of her departure. On Maris's last day, the staff threw a small goodbye reception in the main conference room. People who'd worked alongside her for years expressed genuine regret at her leaving, several admitting they'd taken her competence for granted. Adrian kept his remarks brief and professional, thanking her for her service and wishing her success in future endeavors, while carefully avoiding any hint of the truth humming beneath his words. When everyone else had returned to work and only Catherine remained to oversee final paperwork, Maris packed the last items from her desk into a banker's box. Personal books, a small plant, a framed photo of her grandmother. Adrian stood in his doorway, watching, memorizing the moment as a demarcation point between before and after. "That's everything," Maris said, straightening and brushing invisible dust from her skirt. She looked at him across the now empty space between them, professional boundaries dissolving even as they maintained careful physical distance. "Thank you, Adrian, for everything you've taught me, for trusting me with responsibilities beyond my job description, for being someone worth working for." "Thank you," Adrian replied, throat tight with emotion, "for being exceptional at everything you do, for making this company better, for making me better." Catherine cleared her throat delicately. "I'll walk you out, Maris. Make sure security has your exit processed properly." Maris nodded, lifting the box. She held Adrian's gaze for one more moment, seeing everything neither of them could say aloud in an office still technically binding them to professional conduct, then turned and walked away. Adrian returned to his office and closed the door, sitting in silence broken only by city sounds filtering through glass. The space felt different already, emptier. Jennifer was perfectly capable, but she wasn't Maris. Nobody was. His phone buzzed with a text. From Maris. 6 weeks. "I'm counting the days." Adrian smiled despite the ache in his chest and typed back, "Me too." The following weeks tested Adrian's patience in ways billion-dollar negotiations never had. He threw himself into work, using Valecor's demands as distraction from Maris's absence. Jennifer adjusted to her role competently, and Adrian made sure to be fair to her even while noticing all the small ways she wasn't Maris, didn't anticipate his needs quite as precisely, didn't challenge his thinking when he needed pushing, didn't make him laugh with dry observations about corporate absurdity. He and Maris communicated carefully through these weeks, text messages that maintained plausible deniability, occasional phone calls that could be explained as professional courtesy if anyone asked. They talked about Maris's new position at Thornton Consulting, where she was already making waves with her efficiency recommendation. They talked about Valecor's latest product development. They talked about everything except the countdown both of them were tracking. Marcus continued making noise on the board, but without Maris present to fuel his narrative, his complaints lost momentum. Patricia called Adrian midway through the waiting period to report that Marcus's influence was waning. "He overplayed his hand," Patricia said bluntly. "Made accusations he couldn't substantiate. Looked petty and territorial instead of protective. Several board members are questioning whether he's really aligned with Valecor's interests or just nursing wounded pride. Don't be surprised if he resigns within the year." "I won't hold my breath," Adrian replied, but he felt vindication nonetheless. They'd weathered Marcus's attack. Veilcore had survived the storm. And now, finally, time was running out on the waiting period he and Maris had imposed. 6 weeks to the day after Maris's departure from Veilcore, Adrian's phone rang at 8 in the morning. Maris's name lit up the screen, and his heart rate immediately accelerated. "Hi," he answered, trying for casual and probably failing. "Hi yourself." Maris's voice carried warmth that professional calls never allow. "So I was thinking about dinner tonight, somewhere public enough to be seen but private enough for actual conversation, assuming you're ready to stop hiding." "I've been ready for 6 weeks." "Good, because I made reservations at Aurelio's for 7:30. And Adrian, I'm done pretending this is anything other than what it is. Tonight isn't two colleagues having dinner. It's a first date, real and public and intentional." Adrian felt something tight in his chest finally release. "I'll pick you up at 7. "It's a date," Maris said, and he could hear her smile through the phone. Adrian spent the rest of the day distracted and useless for actual work. Jennifer noticed his unusual preoccupation, but was too professional to comment. At 5 o'clock, Adrian left the office, something he rarely did before 7 or 8, and went home to prepare like the evening actually mattered. Because it did. More than anything had in longer than he could remember. At 7 precisely, Adrian pulled up to Maris's building wearing a suit he'd spent 30 minutes selecting, carrying flowers he'd spent another 20 choosing. When Maris emerged, his breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress the color of deep wine, elegant and confident, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of the professional twist she'd maintained at Veilcore. She looked simultaneously familiar and completely new, still herself, but freed from corporate constraints that had kept parts of her carefully hidden. "You brought flowers," Maris said, accepting the bouquet with visible pleasure. "How traditional of you." "I'm a traditional guy in some ways," Adrian replied, holding the car door for her. "Just not the ways that involve accepting arbitrary social hierarchies." "Good to know." Maris settled into the passenger seat, and Adrian caught the scent of her perfume, something subtly different from what she'd worn at the office. More personal and less professional. Aurelio's was an upscale Italian restaurant known for excellent food, and the kind of discreet ambiance that attracted business dinners and romantic dates in equal measure. Adrian had chosen it deliberately, nice enough to signal importance, visible enough that if anyone from their world happened to be dining there, they'd see Adrian Vale having dinner with Maris Bennett and draw their own conclusion. The maitre d' recognized Adrian immediately and led them to a corner table with enough privacy for intimate conversation, but clear sightlines from the main dining room. Perfect. "Nervous?" Maris asked once they were seated, menus in hand but ignored for the moment. "Terrified," Adrian admitted, which is ridiculous. "I've closed deals worth hundreds of millions, faced down hostile boards, survived public scrutiny that would have broken most people. But this, sitting across from you knowing everything's changed, this scares me more than any of that. Because it matters more." Maris reached across the table, taking his hand openly, publicly, without hesitation. "Business is about strategy and calculation. This is about being human and vulnerable. Of course, it's scarier." Her touch sent electricity through Adrian's nervous system. 3 years of carefully maintained professional distance made this simple contact feel monumental. "I've imagined this," he said quietly. "Being able to take your hand across a dinner table. Being able to look at you without worrying who might notice. Being able to just be with you without all the layers of professional propriety we had to maintain. And now that you can," Maris's thumb traced gentle circles on his palm. "It's better than I imagined, and more terrifying, because now there's nothing protecting us except whether this actually works." "Then let's find out if it works." Maris squeezed his hand gently before releasing it to pick up the menu. Starting with dinner and conversation and being two people who like each other seeing if they liked each other the same way outside an office. They ordered wine and pasta, falling into conversation that felt simultaneously familiar and entirely new. Without professional boundaries defining their interaction, they discovered depths they'd only glimpsed before. Maris talked about her childhood in the Midwest, growing up watching her mother navigate corporate spaces that weren't designed for women and learning early that invisibility was sometimes survival. Adrian shared stories about building Veilcore, the lean years when he'd lived on ramen and determination.
The moment he'd realized his company had become something that mattered beyond just his personal ambition. "I never asked you," Maris said midway through their entrees, "why you really invited me to the Harrington Gala."
The real reason, not the explanation you gave me then. Adrian considered the question, searching for truth beneath rationalization. Because I was lonely, profoundly, achingly lonely, in ways I didn't fully recognize until I started working late with you and realized those were the only hours I didn't feel it. You saw me as human instead of as an opportunity. And I think part of me was already in love with you even then, even though I couldn't acknowledge it. So I created a situation that let me spend an evening with you outside the office. Told myself it was about challenging social norms, when really it was about not wanting to face another important event feeling alone in the crowd. Maris was quiet, her expression soft with understanding. I knew, not consciously maybe, but some part of me recognized what you were really asking, which is why I said yes even though I knew it would be brutal. Because I was tired of being invisible, and you were offering to make me visible. And because I'd already started falling for you too, in those late-night work sessions where you'd forget to be the billionaire CEO and just be Adrian, funny and brilliant and unexpectedly kind. "When did you know?" Adrian asked. "When did it shift from just working together to something more?" "There wasn't one moment." Maris tilted her head thoughtfully. "It was cumulative. The time you defended my recommendation to the board, even though it contradicted your initial instinct, because you trusted my analysis more than your ego. The time you noticed I'd had a terrible day and ordered in from my favorite restaurant without my asking. The time you stayed up all night helping me debug a scheduling crisis that wasn't remotely your problem because you knew it mattered to me. It was 1,000 small moments of you being decent and real and treating me like I mattered beyond my utility. You matter beyond any measure of utility," Adrian said quietly. "You matter because you're you. Brilliant and fierce and uncompromising and kind in ways people don't see because you hide it behind competence. You matter because you make me want to be better. You matter because when I imagine the future, you're in it. Not as my assistant, not as an employee, but as whatever we're building here." Maris's eyes glistened slightly in the candlelight. "Adrian Vale, are you getting emotional in an upscale Italian restaurant?" "Apparently." Adrian smiled through the tightness in his throat. "You bring it out in me." "Good." Maris raised her wine glass. "To being human and vulnerable and terrifyingly honest about what we want." Adrian lifted his glass to meet hers. "To whatever comes next." They were finishing dessert, tiramisu they'd ordered to share, feeding each other bites with the kind of casual intimacy that felt revolutionary after years of careful distance. When Adrian noticed movement in his peripheral vision, he looked up to see Vivian Lassiter making her way through the restaurant, her sharp eyes landing on their table with visible calculation. "Incoming," Adrian murmured to Maris. "Vivian at 3 o'clock. Maris didn't turn, didn't tense, simply set down her fork and met Adrian's eyes with calm readiness. "Let her come." Vivian materialized at their table wearing her signature false warmth like expensive perfume. "Adrian, darling, and Maris, what a surprise. I'd heard you left Valcor. New opportunities treating you well?" "Exceptionally well," Maris replied smoothly. "Thornton Consulting is exactly the challenge I was looking for." "How wonderful." Vivian's eyes darted between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. "And here you both are, having dinner together. How friendly." "We are friends," Adrian said easily. "Have been for years. Now that we're no longer working together, we're free to socialize without professional complications." "Of course." Vivian smiled sharply. "Though I'm sure people will talk. You know how it is. When a powerful man and his former assistant are seen dining together so soon after her departure, assumptions get made." "Let them make assumptions," Maris said, her tone pleasant but uncompromising. "People who waste energy on gossip about other people's private lives are usually compensating for the emptiness in their own." Vivian's face flushed. "Well, I can see you're busy. Enjoy your evening." She swept away with wounded dignity, and Adrian couldn't suppress a laugh once she was out of earshot. "You just called Vivian Lassiter's life empty to her face." "I implied it," Maris corrected. "There's a difference. And honestly, I'm done being polite to people who only speak to me to gather ammunition for gossip." She wanted to know if we're together so she could run tell everyone. Now she knows, and I don't care what she does with the information. You're magnificent. I'm honest. Maris smiled. There's power in just being straightforward about what you want instead of playing games. I want to be here with you. I want people to know I'm here with you. I want to build something real without hiding it from people whose approval never mattered anyway. Adrian signaled for the check, suddenly wanting privacy to say everything building in his chest. They left Aurelio's hand in hand, and Adrian felt eyes tracking their departure, but couldn't bring himself to care. Let them look. Let them gossip. Let them draw whatever conclusions they wanted. He drove Maris home through streets glittering with evening lights, the city feeling different somehow, more alive, more possible. When they arrived at her building, Adrian parked and turned to face her. I don't want this evening to end, he admitted. Then come upstairs. Maris held his gaze steadily. Have coffee, talk more, or just sit quietly and be together without all the noise of the outside world demanding we perform or explain ourselves. Adrian followed her inside, his heart hammering as they rode the elevator in charged silence. Maris's apartment was exactly what he'd expected. Elegant without being ostentatious, full of books and art that revealed her taste and intelligence. She made coffee while Adrian examined her bookshelves, noting titles on philosophy and economics alongside fiction that ranged from literary to escapist. You have good taste in books, he said when she returned with 2 steaming mugs. I have eclectic taste in books, Maris corrected, settling onto her couch and patting the cushion beside her. Some people only read things that make them look smart. I read things that actually interest me, which includes both Kant and romance novels, often in the same week. Adrian joined her on the couch, accepting coffee that was perfect. She'd remembered exactly how he took it from 3 years of making it at the office. The domesticity of the gesture struck him with unexpected force. What happens now? He asked quietly. We've crossed all the professional boundaries. We've gone public with dinner where people saw us. We've admitted we love each other. What comes next? We figure it out as we go. Maris set down her coffee and shifted closer, close enough that Adrian could feel her warmth. We date like normal people. We learn each other outside of work contexts. We make mistakes and have disagreements and discover whether what worked in an office translates to actual relationship compatibility. We're patient with the process instead of trying to force some predetermined outcome. That sounds terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Most worthwhile things are. Maris reached up, touching his face with gentle fingers. Adrian, I need you to understand something. I don't have expectations beyond honesty and effort. I'm not trying to be your trophy or your proof that you've transcended social boundaries or your redemption arc. I'm just trying to be with you and see if we work together in this new context. Whatever happens, I need you to be present and real instead of performing some version of yourself you think I want. I don't know if I know how to do that. Adrian's voice came out rough with emotion. I've spent so long being what other people needed, the genius CEO, the self-made success story, the guy who proved everyone wrong. I'm not sure who I am when I'm not performing those roles. Then we'll figure that out together. Maris's thumb traced his cheekbone. Because I fell in love with glimpses of the real you, the one who emerges at 11 p.m. when you're too tired to maintain facades. The one who laughs at terrible puns and stress-eats pizza and admits when he's scared. That's who I want. Not the magazine cover version, the actual human underneath. Adrian felt something crack open inside him, defenses he'd maintained for decades crumbling under the steady pressure of being truly seen. What if you don't like what you find when all the performance stops? What if I love it even more? Maris leaned forward, closing the distance between them until her forehead rested against his. Adrian, you're already enough. You don't have to earn my affection by being exceptional or accomplished or perfect. You just have to be honest and present and willing to try. That's all I'm asking. Adrian closed the final distance between them, kissing her with years of restrained longing finally unleashed. Maris responded immediately, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his with urgent relief. The kiss was everything their professional relationship had never allowed, messy and passionate and completely real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. What? Maris asked, smiling against his lips.
I just realized I've wanted to do that since approximately the second week you worked for me, and I've spent 3 years telling myself it was impossible. It was impossible then. Maris kissed him again, softer this time. But it's possible now. That's what matters. They stayed on Maris's couch until well past midnight, talking and kissing and discovering each other in ways professional boundaries had prevented.
Adrian learned that Maris hummed unconsciously when she was content, that she had a scar on her left shoulder from a childhood bike accident, that she loved terrible action movies but felt obligated to also watch art films to maintain her intellectual credibility. Maris learned that Adrian had a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of classic rock trivia, that he cooked when stressed but never for himself, that he'd never been in love before her and had almost convinced himself he was incapable of it. "I should probably go," Adrian said eventually, though he made no move to actually leave. "Let you sleep. We both have work tomorrow."
You could stay, Maris offered quietly. Nothing has to happen except sleep, but you could stay.
Adrian wanted to say yes with an intensity that almost frightened him, but something held him back. Awareness that rushing would cheapen what they were building, that they deserved time to establish foundation before complicating things with the intimacy that came with shared nights. "Ask me again after we've had at least 5 dates," he said, kissing her forehead. "When we've built more than one evening of this. I want to do this right, Maris. I want to give us the best possible chance of working."
5 dates. Maris smiled. It's very specific. I'm a specific guy. Adrian stood reluctantly. "Have dinner with me tomorrow? And the day after? And basically every day until 5 dates becomes 50? That sounds perfect." Adrian left with the taste of her still on his lips and the sound of her laugh warming him against the cool night air.
He drove home feeling lighter than he had in years, as though he'd finally set down weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. The following weeks unfolded with the sweetness of new relationship discovery, layered over the foundation of years of knowing each other professionally. They had dinner at hole-in-the-wall restaurants Adrian had discovered in his struggling years, and upscale places where being seen together sent messages to the social circles that had tried to keep them apart. They went to museums and concerts and simply walked through the city talking about everything and nothing. The gossip spread exactly as expected. Vivian made sure everyone knew about the dinner at Billionaire. Richard Ashford made snide comments about Adrian's assistant problem at business events. Marcus tried one more board challenge based on Adrian's compromised judgment, but Patricia shut him down so decisively that Marcus resigned from Belcour's board 2 weeks later, citing philosophical differences about leadership priorities. Adrian couldn't bring himself to care about any of it. The same people who'd mocked Maris at the Harrington Gala now scrambled for her consulting services when word spread about the efficiency improvements she was implementing at major corporations. The same circles that had tried to shame Adrian for bringing her to their events now found themselves excluded from gatherings thrown by people who actually admired what Adrian and Maris represented. Merit over inheritance, capability over connections, real accomplishment over empty prestige. 3 months into their relationship, Adrian received an invitation to the Spring Philanthropy Summit, an event even more prestigious than the Harrington Gala, featuring philanthropists, activists, and social entrepreneurs from around the world. The invitation included a +1. "Come with me," Adrian said, showing Maris the heavy cardstock invitation, over dinner at the pizzeria that had become their unofficial headquarters for important conversations. "As your girlfriend?" Maris asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "As my partner." Adrian took her hand across the familiar table. "As the person I love and want beside me. As someone who belongs there more than most of the people attending because you've actually done something meaningful with your resources. Come with me, and let's show them what real partnership looks like." "Yes," Maris said simply. "But this time, I'm wearing something that costs exactly as much as I want to spend, and I'm not hiding anything about who I am or what I've accomplished. No more playing small. I wouldn't want you any other way." The night of the summit arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made the city feel almost magical. Adrian picked up Maurice from her apartment. She'd refused to move in together despite his hints, saying she wanted to maintain some independence while they built their relationship, and felt his heart stop when she emerged. She wore a gown that shimmered like starlight, elegant and expensive and unapologetically bold. Her hair was swept up to reveal diamond earrings Adrian had given her for their 3-month anniversary. She looked powerful and beautiful and completely herself. No longer the woman who'd made herself small to survive corporate spaces, but someone who claimed her full presence without apology. "You're stunning," Adrian said, and meant it in every possible way. "You're not so bad yourself." Maris kissed him, leaving lipstick he didn't bother to wipe away. "Ready to scandalize some more wealthy people? With you?" "Always." They arrived at the summit to find it already in full swing. Hundreds of people mingling in a venue designed to showcase both wealth and social consciousness. Adrian recognized faces from business, politics, entertainment, the kind of gathering where actual influence mixed with performative philanthropy. But this time felt different. This time, Adrian wasn't an outsider trying to prove he belonged. He was simply a man attending with the woman he loved, both of them secure enough in their own worth that external validation had become irrelevant. They circulated through the crowd, and Adrian noticed the shift immediately. People treated Maris with respect, bordering on deference. Word of her healthcare initiative and consulting success had spread through networks that valued actual accomplishment. Several foundation directors approached her about collaboration opportunities. A senator asked about her policy recommendations for improving healthcare access. A tech CEO wanted to discuss efficiency strategies for his company. Maris handled every interaction with the same calm competence she brought to managing Adrian's schedule, but now without hiding her intelligence or downplaying her achievements. She was magnetic, drawing people who recognized substance over superficiality. "She's remarkable," Patricia Thornwell said, appearing at Adrian's elbow while Maris spoke with a group of healthcare administrators. "I admit, I had reservations about your relationship. Thought it might be a distraction or a liability. I was wrong. She's an asset in every possible way." "She's not an asset," Adrian corrected gently. "She's a person I love who happens to be extraordinary. That's an important distinction." Patricia smiled, genuine warmth instead of her usual calculating assessment. "You're right, and you're different with her, less performative, more present. It's good to see you actually living instead of just accomplishing." Later in the evening, the summit's organizers announced a special recognition for emerging philanthropic leaders. Adrian watched with growing suspicion as they described the recipients' work: innovative healthcare delivery models, sustainable program design, measurable impact on underserved communities. "This year's Emerging Impact Award goes to Maris Bennett," the speaker announced, and applause thundered through the venue. Maris's expression showed genuine surprise as she made her way to the stage, accepting the award with the grace that had become her signature. But when she spoke, Adrian heard the steel underneath the polish. "Thank you for this recognition," Maris said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "But I want to be direct about something. I didn't create the Children's Healthcare Initiative for awards or recognition. I created it because a 9-year-old girl I was mentoring died from a preventable condition, and I was tired of accepting systemic failures as inevitable. This award is lovely, but it's meaningless if it doesn't translate to more people taking action. More people looking at systems that fail vulnerable populations and deciding to fix them, instead of just acknowledging they're broken." She paused, letting her words settle over an audience unaccustomed to being challenged at their own events. "So here's my challenge to everyone in this room. You have resources, you have influence, you have the capacity to create change that actually matters. Stop treating philanthropy like a hobby or a tax strategy or a way to burnish your legacy. Start treating it like the urgent moral obligation it is. Because there are children dying right now from preventable causes, and every moment we spend congratulating ourselves for caring is a moment we could have spent actually solving problems." Maris held up the award, an elegant glass sculpture probably worth thousands of dollars. "This is beautiful, but it won't save a single life. Your action will. So act." She returned to her seat amid applause that sounded different now, less polite, more energized. Adrian felt pride surge through him so intensely it almost hurt. "That was incredible," he said when she rejoined him. "That was necessary." Maris set down the award. "I'm tired of spaces where people pat themselves on the back for caring without actually doing the work to change anything. If they're going to give me a platform, I'm going to use it to make them uncomfortable enough to actually move." They left the summit early, both ready to trade glittering crowds for quiet conversation. In the car, Maris kicked off her heels and laughed. "Did you see Vivian's face when I challenged the room? She looked personally offended that someone would suggest her philanthropy might be performative. Probably because it is, Adrian replied, taking the route to Maris's apartment without needing to ask. You okay? That was a lot of attention and pressure. I'm perfect. Maris reached for his hand. Better than perfect, actually. Because I got to say what I actually think instead of packaging it for palatability. And because I get to leave with you instead of networking with people I don't respect. They pulled up to her building and Adrian killed the engine but made no move to leave. I love you, he said quietly. I love how fierce you are, how uncompromising, how you refuse to make yourself smaller for anyone's comfort. I love that you challenge me and push me and make me want to be someone worthy of you. You already are worthy. Maris squeezed his hand, but I love you too. For seeing me when I was invisible, for standing beside me when it would have been easier to distance yourself, for being brave enough to risk everything you built for a chance at something real. Come upstairs with me, Maris added softly. It's been 5 days. Actually, it's been more like 30. And I'm tired of you leaving every night when we both know where this is going. Adrian felt his pulse accelerate. Are you sure? Completely, Maris smiled. I love you. You love me. We've built foundation and trust and real partnership. I'm not interested in artificial timelines or playing games about what we want. I want you to stay, tonight and as many nights as you choose to. They went upstairs together, and Adrian felt like he was crossing another threshold. From professional distance to friendship to romance to whatever deeper territory they were entering now. Maris unlocked her door, and they stepped into the space that had become familiar over months of coffee and conversation and building something that mattered. What followed was tender and electric, years of restrained longing finally finding full expression. They discovered each other with the patience of people who knew they had time, who weren't rushing towards some arbitrary finish line, but simply exploring what it meant to be fully present with another person. Afterward, lying in Maris's bed with her curled against his chest, Adrian felt peace settle over him like a benediction. This was what he'd been missing all those years, not just physical intimacy, but genuine connection, being known and choosing to be known, being vulnerable and finding that vulnerability met with tenderness instead of judgment. Stay, Maris murmured against his chest. Not just tonight. Stay. Are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. Maris propped herself up to meet his eyes. Real partnership. Shared space and shared challenges and shared joy. You and me choosing each other every day instead of performing independence we don't actually want. Adrian felt emotion tighten his throat. Yes. To all of it. Yes. The months that followed transformed Adrian's understanding of what life could be when lived authentically instead of strategically. He and Maris found a new apartment together, something that was theirs rather than his or hers, a space they built intentionally to reflect both of them. They established rhythms of domesticity that felt revolutionary after years of solitude. Morning coffee and shared newspapers. Evening cooking experiments that sometimes succeeded and sometimes ended in laughter and takeout. Quiet nights reading on the couch, simply being together without needing to perform or impress. Velcor continued thriving under Adrian's leadership, but he found himself caring less about being the brilliant CEO and more about being effective and ethical. He delegated more, trusted his team more, left the office at reasonable hours more. People noticed the change. Several commented that he seemed more grounded, more present, more human. Love looks good on you, Catherine said during a quarterly review. You're making better decisions, taking fewer unnecessary risks, actually listening to advice instead of just tolerating it. Whatever you and Maris have going, it's working. Maris's consulting practice flourished as word spread about her effectiveness. She turned down more work than she accepted, choosing projects that aligned with her values rather than just maximizing income. Together, she and Adrian established a foundation focused on healthcare access and education. Not for publicity, but because they had resources and saw needs they could address. The social circles that had tried to exclude them found themselves increasingly irrelevant. The Harrington Gala happened again the following year, and Adrian and Maris were invited but declined. They spent that evening instead at a community health clinic opening, one funded by Maris's initiative, staffed by passionate professionals, serving families who needed it desperately. This matters more, Maris said, watching children receive checkups they might not have gotten otherwise. All those people in expensive gowns congratulating themselves for caring, this is what caring actually looks like. Adrian pulled her close, kissing her temple. You've taught me that. How to care about things that matter instead of things that just look important. A year and a half after the Harrington Gala that changed everything, Adrian took Maris back to the pizzeria where they'd had so many important conversations. The owner greeted them warmly, led them to their usual booth, and pretended not to notice when Adrian got down on one knee. I had a whole speech planned, Adrian said, holding a ring he'd spent weeks selecting, elegant and understated like Maris herself, about how you changed my life and taught me what real partnership means, and made me believe I could be loved for who I actually am instead of what I've accomplished. But standing here, all I can think is that I want forever, every day, every challenge, every joy. I want to build a life with you that's real and honest and ours. Maris Bennett, will you marry me? Maris was crying the first time Adrian had seen her cry, but she was also laughing. Yes, absolutely yes, to all of it, forever. The wedding, when it came 6 months later, was small and intimate. Just close friends and family, people who actually mattered instead of social obligations. They got married in a garden at sunset, promising each other honesty and partnership and the courage to keep choosing authenticity over performance. Patricia Thornwell attended, along with Catherine and several Vailcore executives who'd become genuine friends. Maris's consulting colleagues came, along with people from the healthcare initiative she'd built. The pizzeria owner was there, grinning proudly like he'd known all along they were meant for each other. Richard Ashford and Vivian Lassiter weren't invited. Neither was Marcus Vandermeer, who quietly faded from relevance after his board resignation. The people who'd tried to keep Adrian and Maris apart, who'd insisted social hierarchies mattered more than human connection, who dismissed Maris as unworthy. They learned about the wedding afterward, through social media posts and society column mentions that treated the event as significant because of what it represented, not who was excluded from it. As Adrian and Maris exchanged vows in front of people who genuinely cared about them, Adrian realized how completely his life had transformed. The lonely billionaire who'd stood in his penthouse feeling empty despite accomplishment had become a man surrounded by real connection. The woman who'd made herself invisible to survive had claimed her full presence and changed systems that needed changing. Together, they'd proven that power didn't come from bloodlines or social position. It came from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept limitations others tried to impose. It came from choosing authenticity over performance, substance over superficiality, real partnership over strategic alliance. It came from being brave enough to love openly, to challenge unjust hierarchy, to build something genuine in a world that often rewarded hollow facades. The reception lasted well into the night, full of laughter and terrible dancing and joy that felt earned rather than performed. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Adrian and Maris stood together watching the last stars appear in the darkening sky. No regrets? Maris asked, leaning against him with comfortable intimacy. Not even one. Adrian wrapped his arms around her. Everything that happened, the gala, the board fight, the gossip, all of it was worth it to get here. To get where? To you. To us. To a life that's actually real instead of just successful. Adrian kissed her softly. To understanding that the only approval that matters is our own, and that power comes from being undeniable rather than from being granted permission. Maris smiled against his lips, very philosophical for a tech CEO. I had a good teacher. Adrian pulled her closer. She taught me that true strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It commands respect by simply being undeniable. And somewhere in the city, they'd made theirs. In the social circles that had tried to keep them apart, people were learning that lesson too. Learning that dismissing someone based on job titles or social position was foolish when that person possessed real capability and determination. Learning that the hierarchies they'd clung to were crumbling under the weight of people who refused to accept arbitrary limitations. The world was changing, not because Adrian and Maris had set out to change it, but because they'd chosen to be authentic in spaces that demanded performance, because they'd refused to shrink themselves to fit other people's expectations, because they'd proven that love and partnership built on genuine respect mattered more than all the old money and empty prestige in the world. And those who'd once mocked them, who'd dismissed them, who'd tried to keep them in boxes they'd outgrown, they were left outside the very world they thought they owned, watching as real power redefined itself around substance instead of superficiality. Adrian and Maris walked into their future together, hand in hand, no longer performing for audiences who didn't matter. Just two people who'd found each other despite all the forces trying to keep them apart, who'd built something real from the wreckage of arbitrary social hierarchies. Just two people who'd learned that the only thing truly undeniable was the power of choosing authenticity, partnership, and love over everything else. And that was more than enough.